everybody to the Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting for April 7th, 2020. I'm going to start out with a little housekeeping for our virtual meeting. Welcome to our second virtual meeting. In this new format, we just have a few housekeeping items to review, similar to last week, and I'll probably be repeating this each time that we're on a virtual setting, just so everybody knows. The public watching the meeting, when you're registered to watch for this meeting, you're registered in our system as attendees. Attendees are webinar participants who are simply viewers of the meeting, an audience member. Your microphone and your webcam are automatically muted as attendees. However, there will be a time during the meeting that will open the meeting up for public comment. When that meeting time comes, if you wish to make public comment, I'll ask you to raise your virtual hand to be recognized. You should see a hand icon on the device you're using to watch the meeting. Simply press the hand icon once to raise your hand. When public comment begins, our meeting organizer will call names, and when your name is called, you'll be unmuted and we're given 3 minutes for public comment. When your 3 minutes is up, you'll go back into muted status and the next name will be called. You can then continue to watch the webinar as long as you choose. We'll try to give everyone who wishes to present public comment an opportunity to speak, but please note, in the event there are more people wishing to speak than the allotted time allows, we may need to limit the number of speakers and or reduce the time allotted to each speaker. Speakers will then be selected randomly to participate. So thank you for that. We have one time certain at 3 p.m. today in the afternoon. And you may see me nod my head randomly throughout the meeting. And that's just me acknowledging fellow commissioners or speakers in queue so that I can call upon them. So we'll start today with item number 1, adjustments to the agenda. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to county administration, which is our first item, the COVID update. Mr. Mcallister.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Good morning. This is our weekly update that we're starting our board meeting off to provide you with a situational status and report on various matters related to the COVID-19 emergency response in Lane County. Today, as with every week, we'll have Karen Gaffney, our incident commander. Karen, for the public, is our Director of Health and Human Services and is serving as our incident commander for Lane County's emergency public health response for this incident. Today, we'll also have an update, as the board had asked last week. We'll have information regarding expenditures. So to date, what our expenditures have been, particularly under the additional financial authority, expenditure authority the board granted to the county administrator last week. So I'll turn it over to Karen, and she's going to walk through a brief update, and then we'll have time for questions from commissioners.
Thank you, Chair Buck and Commissioners. I will try to move through my update a little bit more quickly this time so that we have enough time for questions. Just by way of review and for the public who may not have been following our emergency response as closely as I know you have, I want to underscore kind of our five-fold approach to addressing COVID-19 in the community. The first is absolutely to contain the spread of disease, and we talk about that as flattening the curve, and we have a number of strategies there I'm happy to talk more about, but that's front and center for us of how do we flatten the curve and contain the spread. The second piece of our response is to make sure that healthcare providers, first responders, and hospitals have what they need. And during the update, we'll talk some about the progress we've made there. The third element is to minimize the economic impact to businesses and individuals in the community. We know that the disease is one piece of what's impacting our communities, but we also have a secondary significant economic impact. The fourth piece is to promote resilience and healing, and as part of that work, we have stood up a mental health response as part of our structure, knowing that the people are struggling for a whole host of reasons, and we need to address that. And then finally, the fifth piece is our public information and guidance. I know the board knows, and many in the community tune in every day, Monday through Friday, to hear our updates. People can look at our website, where we have a host of information and important links, and then really helping people understand how to put that guidance into action. So those are the 5 elements that we have moving through our response. In terms of the spread of disease, our current case count, we will officially post our update later this morning. I do know we have 31 cases. Right before I came to the meeting, when I checked in, we did have 1 additional case that came in the Eugene Springfield area for a gentleman in his 60s who is currently hospitalized. And we have at least 963 negative results. I know when the data pull happens moving forward, we're going to have significantly more negative results to add to that as well. In terms of testing capacity and infrastructure, similar to last week, reagents continue to be an issue in our community. We can't really open up testing opportunities beyond the current criteria until the labs are able to process more tests for us. So we're hoping that that will be resolved at a federal level, as well as looking at what we can do as the feds increase testing, looking for opportunities for Lane County to be a site for perhaps some new innovative testing that's being rolled out. So I'll continue to keep you posted on that. In terms of PPE, you may recall that the county is designated as the clearinghouse for personal protective equipment that is distributed not only to healthcare providers throughout the community, but also to first responders and other specific populations. We continue to accept donations of PPE at the Public Works warehouse from 2 to 4 Monday through Friday, and that's been fantastic. The community has really responded in that way, and we also distribute out to all of the healthcare providers and first responders. To date, we've distributed over 59,000 pieces of PPE to the community. You asked for updates on hospital bed and ICU capacity, which clearly is an important part for us in monitoring our response. And I'm happy to tell you at this point, the significant efforts in the community to stay at home, implement social isolation, and really flatten the curve are helping us be able to operate within our existing resources, both in terms of ICU beds and ventilators. So we're doing okay there at this point. In terms of financial supports for businesses and residents, again, we talked about how it's not only the impact of the disease, but also the impact on the economy. And I distributed, since our last meeting, you asked for a little more information on the Small Business Emergency Loan Fund. And so hopefully you found that breakdown by community that has gone out. There are 3 other places where we're focusing efforts right now in that section. The first is to work with partners to analyze the CARES Act and really help our businesses navigate the nuances of that program. The initial rollout last week was a little overwhelming for lenders and banks, as we expected, and we're hopeful that the logjam will be cleared in the coming weeks and create easier pathways for businesses in the community. The third piece is around a coordinated regional business resource guide. In response to reports from businesses, again, of feeling a little overwhelmed by information, our operations team, led by Austin Ramirez, is working with cities and the chambers of commerce on a coordinated press release on some of the latest business resources to really have a concise and clear guide about the most impactful resources. And then finally, the fourth piece in that is looking forward to a regional economic recovery plan. led by our regional solutions coordinator in the governor's office. Our team is working with partners to finalize and implement a coordinated economic recovery plan through our existing structure. And that really signals a shift from our disease response efforts to more of that long-term recovery strategy. And over the next several weeks, we'll be able to talk with you more about the details there as that becomes more clear. Also want to update you a little bit on our work around vulnerable populations. As you know, the county and the cities of Eugene and Springfield developed a regional approach to helping serve those people who are most vulnerable to serious disease, and in particular, our populations who are homeless. We at the county are working with community partners to operate 2 emergency respite sites, one in Springfield at the Memorial Building and one here in Eugene at the Fairgrounds Expo Center. And then we've also opened up Wheeler Pavilion as a resource for people who are symptomatic and need to be isolated from the population in those 2 congregate settings. The city of Eugene and Springfield are focusing efforts on helping people stay where they are through a combination of mobile outreach and really pushing resources out through distribution sites to help people who otherwise are their supply chain to food and other resources has been disruptive. So the other piece that's exciting as part of our vulnerable populations work is, as you know, the county last week authorized us to move forward with a purchase of property at 100 River Avenue. So I wanted to give you an update on that particular work. And Jeff Kincaid in our logistics section has been doing just a fantastic job of moving this effort forward. So updates since we last met, we did begin our maximum 21-day due diligence period last week, March 31st. We submitted our offer and it was accepted by the seller. We've worked to coordinate the reception of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers team for property inspection, and that included sharing relevant information about the property. We have an internal team to really plan and coordinate the operations of the facility that will include a phasing plan so that we can get in there as quickly as possible while we're staging some of the other renovations that would need to happen. That team walked the property on Friday and began their planning efforts. Yesterday, the Army Corps of Engineers team conducted they were on site to conduct their inspection of the site. It included mechanical, electrical, and civil engineers, project managers, and a Department of Homeland Security representative. That team was supported by county staff that included public health, building official, and county engineer, in addition to representatives from the Fire Marshal's office and EWEB. It was really a pretty amazing sight to have all of those partners come together to enable us to move quickly on that building. Preliminary feedback from the team is encouraging and didn't raise any significant flags for us. Deep cleaning is scheduled to start today and to be completed this week. And that includes interior and exterior cleaning to prepare the building for occupancy. We're expecting the final report from the Army Corps team to be submitted no later than Friday. And we've asked them for any preliminary information that they can provide us in advance of that. And our focus is to get that facility opened as quickly as possible. And then one last piece before I turn it over to Steve for any internal updates. As you know, the board has authorized expenditures as part of our emergency declaration, and we've agreed that it's a good idea to provide you updates at the board meeting on how we're doing on our expenditures to date. And I want to be clear that what counts against that $5 million authorization to the county administrator are really those costs that are above and beyond. So what I'm going to report are costs for our emergency response that include personnel overtime, materials and services, and contracts that are specifically targeted to this emergency response. And it does take a little while for some expenses to hit our actual finance system. So some of these are estimates, but I think we're pretty close on actual cost to date, $485,954, with an additional $396,000 encumbered through the end of April. And those encumbrances are primarily our respite shelter contracts and the contracts for increased facility cleaning in all of the county buildings. So that gives us a total encumbered and spent to date of $882,581 up against that $5 million. Of course, the $1.8 million that was approved toward the purchase of River Avenue is outside of that total because that was a separate board authorization. So I know that was really fast. Steve, do you want to do anything about internal county services, and then we can open it up?
I'll just make a couple of brief notes. And I do have one thing, Karen, when it goes back to you, if you don't mind just providing the breakdown of, we have 31 positive test results, and we were tracking actually within categories of the specific situation for each of those folks. So if you don't mind touching on what that breakdown looks like. Operationally for Lane County, as the board knows, our big effort has been to maintain the services that we provide to the community, but to do it in new ways that keep both our employees and the public safe and healthy, following public health and CDC guidelines. So we now have, I'm pleased to report, over 800 of our employees are set up to work remotely. There's a handful of additional remote connections that we're working on completing. And so we're nearing the end of that process. And to date, that has worked really well. And we appreciate the cooperation of our managers, our staff throughout the organization, and our technology services team, who has worked overtime to implement that huge lift. I want to be clear that we have not stopped really any of the work that we do. We have closed most of our front counters, and we're asking for customers and clients to call ahead to schedule an appointment to try to do as much work on the phone or online as possible. And then I want to just make a brief comment about masks, because, and Karen can add to this from a public health perspective, late last week, the CDC came out with new guidance regarding masks, and we have provided for our employees. I know from a community public health perspective, we've also provided guidance and recommendations to our residents from an employer standpoint. We have shared with our employees that it's important for us to continue to maintain social distance, to continue to wash hands and not touch our face. So those things remain. The CDC's guidance is to reduce, as a further measure to reduce community spread of the virus, that individuals may wear and are encouraged to wear homemade cloth masks. And it's important, I think, to make a distinction between the really critical and in short supply personal protective equipment like N95 and surgical masks that we want to preserve for our healthcare workers who are in the front lines of battling this virus and at the greatest risk of exposure. But for the rest of us to mitigate and as another measure to reduce community spread, wearing a homemade cloth mask is something that the CDC has recommended when you're going out in public and where you're not able to maintain 6 feet of distance. There's a great video that's 45 seconds long by the Surgeon General on YouTube, and it's linked at the CDC's website, that shows you, the Surgeon General shows you in 45 seconds how to make a homemade cloth mask. And so I'd encourage people that are interested in that really is the best way to pursue that, both from a community and an employee standpoint. That's all I have. And then Karen, if you don't mind, just the sort of 3 or 4 points on the positive cases and where those people are. And then we can turn it over for questions.
Thanks. I'm happy to do that, Steve. And again, the data that I'm going to share right now is based on the 30 cases that are on the website, and that will continue to be updated. We update that twice a day. So of our total positives as of last night of 30. 5 of those people have recovered, which is fantastic news, and we're hoping to continue to see that number grow as we update. We do have 6 people currently in the hospital, and as I mentioned, when we update the numbers, the person who tested positive yesterday will be added to that number. We have unfortunately had 1 person pass away, and then 18 of the people who have tested positive are at home. So that gives you a sense of where people are. And again, in a population our size, it's I'm grateful that given how serious things are in other parts of the country, that we can say as of today, we just have 7 people who are in the hospital battling this disease. So I'm grateful for that, and our hospitals are able to maintain within their resources. I guess the other piece I'll just address up front, because I know there have been a lot of questions, is the rationale for public health reporting of what we report and what we don't report to the community. And I want to start by just reminding the board and the public that we're really talking about people's medical conditions, and sometimes there is an important public health reason to disclose communicable diseases. And so when we have that, for instance, in the case of a pandemic, where there might be people who have contact those situations, public health will disclose some very limited information about people's health. The guidance and the law really is that we disclose the minimum amount necessary in order to meet our public health responsibilities. So one of the questions that has come up is how we decide geographically what to disclose about people who test positive. And early on, we decided some counties are only disclosing countywide, and we opted to find a middle ground that we felt could still protect people's privacy and give the community some sense in a county our size of the spread of disease. So we decided to divide the county into 2 categories, our population center, which is Eugene Springfield, and the rest of the county, the communities that surround the Eugene Springfield area. I know there are people who are curious about smaller community level data, and from a public health perspective, we don't release that, both because it's not necessary in order to preserve the health. Secondly, it's really important to us that everyone in every community in Lane County assume that COVID is in their community. And so we would not want people who felt they didn't have a case to suddenly not social distance, or the opposite, if they felt there was a case, to then try to discover who that person was. We know there are cases in other parts of the country where people have been targeted, and we really need to protect people from that. So those are the core reasons about why we landed on this middle ground of not dividing the county into smaller communities other than Eugene Springfield and outside of the Eugene Springfield area. I'm happy to answer more questions about that if the board has it. I just know that there's been some concern in the community. So I'll turn it back to you, Chair Buck.
Okay, Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, for whatever reason, I can't see my own face. So am I kind of in the center, or roughly? Yeah, okay. Here's a couple questions for you, Ms. Gaffney. One of the peculiar problems with this pandemic is some areas of the world, there's a lot of testing of the population, so that the people that do have the disease can be more quickly identified and treated or quarantined or recovered. In other areas of the world, there's no testing. My understanding is in Lane County, there's no testing that is offered to the general public. So in my case, my neighbors up and down my street, some of them are worried about coughing and whether they have this disease or not. They're told that until they have a particularly bad effect, like maybe a very high temperature, they should not try to go to their doctor's office. What is the reason we're not getting the testing, and what is the county doing to get more testing in Lane County, as we've seen in other areas of the world?
Thank you, Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen. In fact, Lane County's rules around testing are the same as the entire state of Oregon in terms of access to how we prioritize access to testing. I think the underlying issue behind your question is, why don't we have more widespread testing in the United States that would mirror what testing looks like in some other parts of the world? And there's a huge piece around supplies with that. And what we have heard from labs is that key supplies such as reagents just aren't available for them to be able to run more tests. In fact, we have a particular provider in Lane County who has equipment and was going to be able to run some tests. They were able to run for 2 days, and then there were no reagents available, and all of that had been diverted elsewhere. So it really is that key supply part of testing that limits the number of tests that are possible. And so given that environment, public health in the state and here in Lane County is forced with the issue of needing to prioritize where that limited supply is used. And so we have prioritized access to those tests for people who are most likely to have the disease. And if you look at our numbers, you see even with that, by far, most people who get tested in Lane County and in Oregon are negative for COVID-19. I think we had maybe, I'm not going to guess on the percentage we've had, but that is true across Lane County and across the state. Is the vast majority of people are testing negative. So we want to make sure that for those people who are seriously ill, or for those people who we know have had contact with someone who has the disease, that we have the testing capability to test them. And then as we get more capability in the state, then we'll be able to open that up. And believe me, there is a huge eagerness in public health to be able to test more people just as soon as we're able to do that.
And then with regard to the rate of transmission, because we have only one death and around 30 cases, is there any way to tell or project how long it will take before we reach the upper end, and then when we start declining? Is there any way to tell that based upon this early data?
Well, that, Commissioner Sorensen, Chair Buck, is the very popular question these days, is trying to figure out what does the timeline look like for when we will reach our peak. And so we've been looking at what that might look like for Lane County and needing to make some assumptions, because as you said, our numbers are fairly small, but looking at statewide and nationally, what we've learned from other countries, our current best guesstimate is that our peak, and again, I know you can't see my hands, but I would say our peak is really going to be a plateau, not a mountain peak, but a plateau. We're expecting around the first week in March. What we know is that the social distancing strategies, our stay at home, stay healthy, have been focused on the intention of really pushing out the case numbers. And so by flattening that curve, it means that our healthcare system will be better able to respond, but it does mean that that peak will last longer. once we hit that in the first week of May. So I have not heard any best guesstimates about how long that will last, but I would imagine we will be at that plateau for probably several weeks before we see, best case, the numbers start to decline on the other side. And a lot of that will depend on what happens over this next month, because we know there's a lag, right? People who are in the hospital now were infected several weeks ago. So there's a lag as we see that play out. But I can say that all indicators are that the social distancing strategies that Oregon has put in place are making a difference.
And then I'll just ask one more question because I know I've taken up a fair amount of time here, but I just wanted to ask, with regard to bigger events that occur in Lane County throughout the spring and into the summer, Oregon Country Fair, Oregon Bach Festival, Lane County Fair, lots of the regional celebrations, Scandinavian Festival, et cetera. When will there be a decision made about whether those have to be canceled this year?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, that's one of those things that we don't want to rush into because we know that if we open things up too soon, that we really risk being right back in our disease curve. So at this point, I'm unwilling to name a date for that because I think this disease is going to dictate that for us. We're unable to tell the disease what our timeline is. So really, it's a matter of tracking the data and being very careful. And I know as we've talked about the economic impacts, and certainly is connected to those large events, as well as just general workplaces being closed, is we have strategically and intentionally put our social connections on hold in order to battle the disease. And so we don't want to stop that prematurely. We need to make sure that we get on the other side of this disease wave before we do that. So hopefully by the next time I'm in front of you, we might have some more specific information.
Thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Commissioner Sorensen, great questions that you asked. Questions that we've all been hearing pretty broadly, and Ms. Gaffney, good answers, answers that you've been repeating quite regularly for the last period of time, and we've been hearing reported broadly also. Chair Buck, I have 3 questions, all of which I hope and expect have short answers. The first one is one that I hear quite a bit. The county's been, by all accounts, been very speedy in its response. It's been responding in a way that's really atypical to what people expect from government. We're getting things done on short notice. We're talking about opening the 20,000 square foot facility at 100 River Avenue. When we toured the facility on April 29, I kind of tongue-in-cheek, Ms. Gaffney said, and we're going to have this open by this coming Friday, right? That was a question mark, and that Friday would have been April 3rd. Now, it was tongue-in-cheek. I didn't expect an affirmative answer. And you gave a report on the process that we're going through right now. And just want to underline, and maybe you can respond to this, that this is the fastest we can get it open based upon the requirements that are necessary, the requirements that are in place to get it open. Is that a correct assessment?
Commissioner Farr, Chair Buck, I appreciate the question because it gives me the opportunity to say really how remarkable it has been to operate in this emergency response environment, and the fact that in less than a week, because we worked through the State Office of Emergency Management, we were able to get the Army Corps down here and that whole team that has just descended on that building and is moving so quickly. It's really an amazing thing to watch. And our plan is, as soon as we get the okay from the Army Corps team and the Fire Marshal and others, our plan is to be able to do a phased opening so that even if we can't get the whole building ready, we can at least start in parts of the building while we work on the rest. So I would say the speed on this one has been tremendous.
And I would agree on all accounts. Anybody who's been associated with it, Karen, has said that, that it's remarkable that you get so many different agencies involved as quickly as you have. My second question, Chair Buck, is regarding going out in public, and you can answer this, Ms. Gaffney. There are some kind of mixed messages about what you can do, and I just heard that people are asked to wear masks if they can't abide by the 6-foot rule. And I'd always thought that the 6-foot rule was pretty much absolute. I got a message from somebody who said that they heard that a lot of people were on the streets in Bethel. Well, I'm looking at the streets in Bethel, and there aren't a lot of people on the streets in Bethel. But if I go to the Fern Ridge Bike Path, for instance, I see that people are walking on the Fern Ridge Bike Path, and some people are riding their bicycles out there pretty fast. And then I've not been by Alton Baker Park or Amazon Park, but they're big parks where they're open. People can go there. People have been going there. I've heard some pretty disgusting stories about what's going on the trails at Amazon Park. But that being said, what can people do? Is it okay to go to a park and walk around a park with your spouse or a family member as long as you're keeping the 6-foot distance?
Commissioner Farr, Chair Buck, thank you for asking that question. I have also heard that come up a lot, particularly as spring comes. It's a really healthy thing for people to be outside. And so I would not want to discourage people from going out. And we absolutely need people to observe the social distancing rule. And I had an opportunity to be down by the Rose Garden last night and was doing my own informal survey of how social distancing is going. And I think there are, obviously, if you are with your family who you live with, there's no reason you have to be 6 foot away from them while you're walking down the path by the river. However, if it's anyone outside that family unit, we absolutely need you to stay 6 feet apart. And the other piece I would just say in terms of outdoor guidance, besides the physical and mental health benefits of exercising outdoors, is that the fresh air helps dilute any spray that might be there as well. So, and Dr. Pat has a lovely rhyme about that I can't remember right now. But the principle is, if you're outside in the outside air, anything is going to dissipate much more quickly than if you're inside a room too. So we absolutely encourage people to get exercise, go outdoors, and wherever you are, indoors or outdoors, we need you to keep the social distancing rules.
That was a great answer, Karen, and I'm going to repeat your words to other people when they're asking me that same question. There are places, however, like Orchard Point Park, a county park, which is open, very big park, and many people can be there and maintain huge distances. But the dam itself is closed. The Corps of Engineers has closed the walk across the dam. I see people walking there, and if it says closed, people should adhere to the closed. Don't do it because there's a reason for it. My third question, and this may be for you, Mr. Mokrahajski. Back on March 18th, you published a list of county services that have been interrupted or changed during the crisis. At that point, it's dynamic. The changes there are different changes each single day. But just as a general rule of thumb, we do have some services that are suspended completely. But I had asked you last week about one in particular, which was a restaurant that had completed is ready to open except for the health inspection. Now, a health inspection is a fairly perfunctory thing. However, in the situation that we're in right now, are we suspending, for instance, health inspections and other perfunctory things that may seem easy, quick to do, but are not consistent with our approach of not addressing issues that aren't directly related to the emergency that we're in? That was a long question. I hope it was clear.
Yeah, no, I understand the question. Thank you, Chair Buck and Commissioner Farr. We have suspended in various types of it, whether it's building inspections, environmental health inspections, on-site appraisals. If the work requires us to go into another person's home or place of business, and we cannot keep our employee or employees and the public, the customer in this case, safe, then we're not doing it. If we're able to do in some cases, it's my understanding we are doing some building inspections if we can do them over the phone or over a video. So in terms of restaurants, it is my understanding that we've suspended that work, but we are looking into ways that we can continue those specific services that that would otherwise, we have concern about whether or not they would create additional public health challenge.
And Mr. Mcallister, when you're considering that, you take a look at the economic impact. Ms. Gaffney has said that one of the 5 factors that we're looking at is how is the effect on the economy. So if an inspection, for instance, could ensure that 10 or 12 people were maintaining their job, and no inspection would mean that those people weren't working. Do you balance that in there, or is it a more strict rule than that?
Well, clearly the public health concern is the primary. We've all recognized that there's been a significant impact on businesses throughout our community and throughout our country as a result of this pandemic and the response. We have generally temporarily accepted that impact because we know that the greater good right now is to flatten the curve and to get on the other side of this outbreak. So, yeah, as Karen has indicated, we are all very concerned about the impact to businesses and employment in the community. And so we're absolutely mindful of that. But the primary concern right now remains, the public health of our community. So we will, the answer to your question is, we will look at those things on a case-by-case basis. If there's a way to accomplish them and keep our employees and the public safe and healthy in the process, then we will do that. If we don't feel that we're able to do that, we're not going to put our employees or members of the public at risk of the behaviors that our public health officials are saying are really critical to getting past this pandemic.
Perfect. So the answer is yes, you are balancing all of the 5 pillars, so to speak, that Karen talked about. Chair Buck, that's all the questions I have. I'm sure that you and the other 2 commissioners have questions that I have, but I'll listen for their questions and answers. Thank you.
Commissioner Burney.
Thank you very much. Karen and Steve, thank you very much for what is obviously a challenge across life arenas. The focus may be public health, it's economic, it's political, it's mental health. It just captures everything. And so the report captured so many different areas. I have a few questions. I'll go from the finite to the general. Karen, you mentioned times that people can make deductions of donations of PPE or food or what have you. Does the county have the ability or no to provide them, if they need it, a slip with a tax deduction for the value of those contributions?
Commissioner Burney, Chair Buck, I think if you're asking if someone makes a donation of PPE, if we can give them a receipt for that that's tax deductible, absolutely, and we have done that.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think it's very clear that until we have something like a telephone app ability to give ourselves a test and provide some diagnostics, really, until we reach that point, this pandemic is controlling us. We are not controlling it. And I think you made reference to that on time frame. And my hat's off, sincerely, to the management going on. So my questions are not going to be dealing with the exceptional job managing this, but it's going to relate to questions I'm receiving, and so I want to convey them. Question 1, you mentioned, different, I think Commissioner Sorensen asked about different events and when we're going to allow them to occur. In some of these cases, I'm sure the people hosting the events are making those decisions anyway, and they're making those decisions moving forward. Are there going to be any kind of land management waivers required so people are not apprehensive if they choose to not have an event this year, that they'll be able to have it the next year?
If you want, I can maybe take a stab at that, Chair Buck and Commissioner Burney. We are looking to that, and you maybe, we've received some communication, and
Right.
we may have public comment today from the Oregon Country Fair, for example. because there are some issues there related to their use permit, and if it doesn't occur, what the impact of that use permit would be.
Right.
So we're working with our legal counsel, with our land management team, and with our legislative affairs folks to determine, is that something that the county can control the decision on, or does it need a state legislative remedy? So I don't have an answer for you right now. We will talk about that, I believe, in the course of this meeting. It is something that we're looking at, and I think there's general understanding of again, the need to balance the public health. We don't want these large events to continue going on while there's an outbreak that we're managing, but we don't want to penalize the long-term ability for those events to occur because of this emergency.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Just a couple more things. Another thing that was discussed, Karen, was you said you were taking a middle path in terms of reporting. I presume, and you said you're dividing the county into sort of two reporting areas. If I heard you correct, Eugene, Springfield metro areas, one, and rural areas are the other. My question is, I presume then that if that's a middle path, some counties are being more finite in their reporting. Is that correct or no? And breaking their counties into more than two areas for reporting cases?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Burney, thanks for that question. That's actually not what I intended. I don't know that there are any other counties that are necessarily reporting out by specific communities, although I have not surveyed all of them, so I don't know that. What I meant by the comment of being in the middle ground, kind of in between what some people were hoping for, which was that we would say by specific town in the community, and the state approach, which is to report just by the county as a whole.
Okay, thank you. And I expect we will hear more on that. I have been told by someone immersed in the Springfield community that even though there is a current moratorium on evictions, that 35 families of the Latinx community in Springfield have been evicted, that some landlords apparently are not abiding and telling people that the sheriff's office will evict, which obviously is not the case. Is there some, apparently the majority of those families have found living quarters with community members, although those community members are concerned because that may violate their rental agreements. And there are 12 families in Springfield in the Latinx community homeless, is what I've been told. Does the county, working with the city of Springfield, have any resource or information or guidance or ways to intervene and assist in those kinds of finite specific cases?
Chair Buck and Commissioner Burney, and I'll start on this, and Steve, if you have anything to add, please feel free. We do regularly meet with the city managers of Eugene and Springfield, so I'll say a couple things. First is that the executive order around evictions was clear that evictions connected to COVID-19 are prohibited. So it's not that all evictions are prohibited. So that is just a piece for the public to understand.
Thank you.
And then I think the other part of that, the agreement that we have had with the cities is that in situations around compliance, whether it's with the ban on evictions or if it's around essential businesses, all of those compliance issues would be managed by the city if the entity is within a city, and then the county would do the work for unincorporated Lane County. So certainly in the example that you've listed, we would refer that to the city for work on that, and certainly can provide guidance and support where that's important.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. One last comment. You discussed, Karen, talking about economic recovery, and I just like to suggest, and I know that within an hour, the $400,000 for small business emergency loans that Springfield and Eugene joined Lane County in providing was subscribed within an hour. And my understanding is there's a waiting list. So I would not necessarily now, unless you want, but I would like to be clearer on a couple of things. One is the priorities as opposed to first come, first serve within a particular framework for eligibility. The priorities for giving those out. Again, people that natively speak a second language in this instance were excluded from that, not because of any fault of ours, but they just didn't know what forms were required and when. And so I want to know, I'm sure we can get them on a waiting list, but I'd like to know what specifically they need to complete so that I can allow people that work with them to procure that information and get them on the waiting list. And I also am going to be curious when we talk economic recovery, whether we're prioritizing local small businesses that are either retrofitting or organizing to respond to producing goods and services that relate to our community's needs that we know that we are falling far short of. Constantly looking to recycle that dollar so that it responds to social needs. I think we have a good sense of what's not out there right now in terms of local capacity. And that's more of a comment. Thank you very much, Chair.
Chair Buck and Commissioner Burney, I will follow up separately in an email to your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I want to give anybody else a chance to speak here or ask any questions if they have any. And then we'll, once we do that, we know we have about 15 people signed up for public comment, but I want to be able to move to the emergency business so some of our staff can go on to other items before we do public comment. So I just wanted to let everybody know what the flow of things are. Any other comments or questions regarding the update? Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Karen for addressing the issue about location reporting in rural Lane County and the importance of us to protect patient privacy and protect the integrity of the investigations around contact history. I've been talking with fellow commissioners in a couple other counties, and they're not doing any sort of location reporting for some of their reports. And have been taking heat because Lane County is actually breaking it down into 2 geographic regions. So we're actually doing a closer job of location reporting than other counties are. And we're being pointed to as, see, those guys that are saying Eugene Springfield at least. So I appreciate that. And I also appreciate that we're going to probably talk later about land use deadlines, because I'm also concerned about the deadlines that we're statutorily obligated to relative to processing approvals within a certain timeline that have public hearings involved. And the fact that the legislature did not go to meet in short session, we haven't gotten clear direction from the state about that statutory 150-day deadline to make a decision, even if there's a public hearing involved. So I plan to bring that up under Commissioner's business as a future agenda item. I'll just mention quickly that some of our issues around testing in this country are an unintended consequence of the taxation on medical devices that was done through the federal government that moved a lot of that offshore. And now it's no longer a domestic industry. So as we start comparing ourselves to other countries, we might want to think about policies that encourage domestic production of medical devices and medical reagents and everything else that we're having shortages of. I have one quick question for Karen. I have gotten one report back to me that there was issues about social distancing at the Lane Event Center over the weekend. And part of the reasons for that were, quote, boredom from the people staying there. Has there been a problem there, or is that just another one of those things like Commissioner Farr said about too many people on the street and then he drives around Bethel and it's empty? Is there an issue out at the event center with social distancing?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Bozovich, we have clear protocols with the provider who's operating that center about social distancing. And I can't swear that there have never been any moments where people aren't closer than 6 feet because it's a pretty large milieu to try and control. But it is signed out there. We've been clear with the provider. I know they're putting that message out to people. And we do have our environmental health staff who are doing visits daily to both of those sites to observe, and we're doing our very best to have compliance with that. And I guess the other piece I would add is in the event that someone has a cough, and even, again, we're talking about a population that's chronically homeless. So there are many people who have underlying medical conditions and might have a cough that's not COVID, but we do provide masks out there and ask anyone, part of our protocol is if you have a cough, you need to be masked.
Thank you.
I have one question to kind of wrap up this particular item on our agenda. Ms. Gaffney, it's my understanding the reagents are the chemicals needed in order to process the testing, and that they are patented, which is part of the bottleneck that we are seeing. Can you address that a little bit?
Thank you, Chair Buck. I can a little bit. I'm certainly not a patent attorney to give in-depth response to that, but a piece of what's different when you look at reagents in this country and some other countries, there are other countries who have opted to break patents in order to have materials more widely available. So I know both you and Commissioner Burney were on a phone call with Representative DeFazio's office last week, where that was one of the asks that our public health department had in order to make things better, would be if the U.S. Would choose to break those patents, that would free up those supplies and we would be able to increase access to testing.
Thank you. Well, with that, we'll move on to our emergency business. Item 3, a discussion regarding the COVID emergency lodging response. I think that's Ms. Gaffney, that would be you, and Mr. Mokryski.
Thank you, Chair Buck and Commissioners. I will briefly introduce this since I know we've just set the context for why this is important in terms of our efforts to address the spread of disease in the community. You may recall from prior reports that one of our key elements in our strategy to contain the spread of disease is to be able to isolate people who are ill, either people who have tested positive for COVID-19 or who are awaiting test results. And for the most part, if people aren't seriously ill and need to be in the hospital, people are isolated at home. There is a subset of the population for which that is not an option, primarily people who are homeless. And then there may be some other small groups of people who, for some reason, are not able to isolate at home. So while we are waiting to bring our River Avenue facility online, which will be a key part of providing us a place to do this, we really are reliant on renting hotel rooms. And renting hotel rooms is something that public health regularly does whenever we need to provide isolation resources for someone. When we began our emergency response, we had a number of hotels who had agreed to rent us rooms for this purpose. And now that we actually have had the need to place some people, those hotels have told us they're no longer able or willing to be a resource for us in meeting that need. In looking at what other communities have been able to do to address this problem, we learned that in Multnomah County, as part of their emergency declaration, they directed staff to prepare an ordinance that would essentially say that any place of lodging within Multnomah County is required to accept or retain housing for an individual who's basically being subsidized by the county or a county contractor. And clearly we would pay for that. But that the hotel or motel would need to cooperate in providing that access during the course of the emergency response. And so today I'm coming to the board to ask for your help in being able to provide that same sort of leverage for us. I will tell you that just in the last couple of days since we have placed this item on the board's agenda, we have had contact from several entities who are interested in helping us find those resources. So I would say my hope is that we wouldn't need to go to an ordinance enforcement effort in order to have the partnership we need with the lodging facilities, but it does provide us some leverage to be able to move those conversations forward if we knew that the board was prioritizing this item for us. Again, I will say the need for them is really not large in number, but it's a critical part of our response to be able to isolate people who are awaiting their test results or who test positive and don't have a home. And we're happy to work out a contract with those facilities to do that. We don't have the resources to rent whole hotels, which I know is what some of the larger cities have done because their population is larger. And so this discussion is really to ask the board to direct staff to come back with a first reading and an ordinance for your consideration as part of this emergency declaration. I will say that in the last couple days, we've had an opportunity to talk with some of the cities about what the impact of this ordinance might be. As you know, typically the county would do an ordinance that would be an unincorporated Lane County. And we are hearing from city managers that it would make the most sense, since this is a public health response and as part of our emergency declaration, that this would be countywide, both in the cities and outside of the cities as a resource for us. So I guess I'm going to pause there, and I don't know if the county administrator has anything to add, or if there are questions. What we're asking for today is a motion that would direct staff to prepare and bring back for first reading that ordinance.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Did Mr. Mcallister want to make some remarks first? No? Okay, my question is, does the Board of Commissioners have authority to do this, or does this have to be done under the authority of the Board of Health?
Thank you, Commissioner Sorensen and Chair Buck. I have been in contact with Steve Dingle, County Council, and I'm hoping he might be on the line to answer that question.
Karen, I am. Typically, Commissioner Sorensen, Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, the only way that ordinances are able to be imposed on the incorporated cities is with their consent, or as the Board of Health, because the city's responsibilities and powers with respect to health were repealed a number of years ago. It sounds to me like either one of those will work, because it sounds like the cities would be willing to agree and adopt rules that would allow us to enforce our ordinance within their city. Is that right, Karen?
I would say that the preference that I heard from the cities who we had a chance to talk with yesterday would be to have the Board of Health adopt it, so that we didn't then have to have each of them go back and take action separately, but that they really saw this as a public health issue that would be appropriate for the Board of Health to act.
And that
I
makes
think
sense.
it would
If
be,
you wanted to do it quickly, that would be the way to go.
Yeah, and that was the
Yeah, I
strong,
think
we
it's-
heard, we heard strong support from our city partners for the county to take the lead and do that.
okay. I think that we should go ahead and make this direction and have it brought back to both the Board of Health and the Lane County Board of Commissioners for discussion at a subsequent meeting. Do you want a motion, Madam Chair? Okay.
Yes.
So at this time, I'll move that we direct staff to bring back for board consideration before the Board of Commissioners and the Board of Health a proposal to, as indicated by Ms. Gaffney.
Second.
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 Got it, Jay. We all seconded it.
Moved by Commissioner Sorensen, second by the rest of the commissioners, but I'll choose Commissioner Posevich since I heard him first. Any other discussion on this? Commissioner Burney and then Commissioner Farr.
I'm going to support this. Karen, my sense is that we've communicated once that there seems to be a shift in working with you, at least from an email that I had the privilege of reading. My belief is that such an action, no matter which body takes it, such an action has, even the discussion of it has gotten the attention of the restaurant and lodging industry. I think all of our intent will be never to have to enforce anything, but I think it does underscore the severity of the need for partnership and cooperation. I also have to believe that there are a variety of other issues at play. If I owned a hotel, have I let all my service staff go already? Can I support the county renting just a few rooms if the rest of my facility is empty? Am I in a position to negotiate significantly below market rates for renting the entire hotel? I think there are a variety of, when we get into the weeds, opportunities for partnership here. And I think this just leverages those opportunities in a good faith but serious way. That's why I support this.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Ms. Gaffney, thank you for bringing this forward. You and I talked a little bit over the weekend about this, and some of the things that Commissioner Burney just stated are concerns that you and I discussed regarding the fact that hotels are operating on minimal staff because they have minimal customers, and what is going to be the effect of them potentially having to, in effect, foot the bill for bringing people back to work. And I think you answered my questions pretty well. But as Commissioner Burney says, our first intent would be to never enforce this. So the other thing that you and I talked about, Ms. Gaffney, and you less than 24 hours ago linked me with Elizabeth Miglorietto, and I understand that Elizabeth is working on with hotels and trying to establish partnerships to provide rooms during this emergency. Is there an update on that, or am I reading that correctly?
Chair Buck and Commissioner Farr, yes, Elizabeth is a key part of our team that's working to have resources for this vulnerable population. I have not had a chance to speak with her this morning before the board meeting to know if there's been progress, but certainly late in the day yesterday, I know our team still did not have any hotels that were willing to rent to us.
Thank you, Ms. Gaffney. And it was in fact 22 hours ago that you sent me the information, so I would have been miraculous if much had happened in the meantime. The other question that I have, Ms. Gaffney, is one that I believe Chair Buck and I have asked you, and that is regarding how are we responding, how does this apply to youth who are affected by, who are vulnerable due to either underlying medical conditions or the fact that they are homeless without a place to spend the night tonight. You provide me with some answers on that. That I'm satisfied with the answers. Can you kind of give a quick recap on what we're doing surrounding youth?
Certainly, Chair Buck and Commissioner Farr, and I'll be brief because I know you have other things on your agenda today. In terms of the specific impact of hotels, yes, absolutely. Youth, just like adults, our strategy, if people become ill and are suspected to have COVID-19 or confirmed, we would want to isolate them and use a hotel resource for that. And on the other part of the
Excuse me, Jane,
broader
if you
youth
could go on
response
mute real quick, that'd be great.
that you were asking about, I would say that the hotels are the key part of our strategy for young people who become ill, and we're excited to be part of the larger community conversation about how best to serve some of our homeless youth who aren't ill, but still may be impacted by the same issues that our chronically homeless adults are in terms of access to food and other resources. So I think there's more information to come on that.
Thank you for your thorough and continually consistent remarks. Thank you, Karen.
Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Bozich.
Thank you. So normally I wouldn't be supporting something that's going to step in and kind of be a taking sort of ordinance, but I want to say that I'm supporting this partly because I'm already seeing in rural communities a real impact of the lodging industry suddenly turning down clients coming out of rural human services providers, whether it's domestic violence or other, because they've had to have an upswing of use of some of this lodging in the beginning of the pandemic response to try and help isolate people. And then that resulted in some people being put into lodging that normally wouldn't, and they have co-occurring mental health and other issues and damage to property. And then a sudden ban of use of those rooms to those agencies. So one of the things I would like to see in this as we prepare it is something that allows us to be the deep pocket for damages, so that these lodging folks can feel like that they're not putting their property at risk as we possibly put people into these rooms that may not adhere to the norms of behavior, and that there's some way that they have somebody to come to, because obviously somebody that's homeless is not going to be able to pay for repairs to a room. So I'd like to see something in there, and as we're thinking about this emergency response, I think a repair to a hotel room that gets damaged by somebody that we're trying to isolate and keep from spreading the infection in the community is part of that emergency funding we've authorized. So I just hope we can work that somehow or another into this ordinance, some ability to make claims back to the county.
Chair Buck, Commissioner Bozich, if I may, I think that would be, I'm glad that you brought that issue up, because we would, under this ordinance, we would be responsible for cleaning the room and doing that, but we would also be legally responsible for the damage. But we could certainly, I think what I hear you saying is you want an explicit statement in any ordinance that the county will be responsible and process and pay any claims for damage to the rooms that are rented as part of this program.
Yes, thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. I have a question about the amount of money that Karen, Ms. Gaffney, you would you have any way of estimating what are we talking about here? Are we talking thousands, hundreds of people? Are we talking hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of dollars? Could you give us some idea of what we might be into once we get this proposal back to the Board of Commissioners and Board of Health?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, again, we see this really as a bridge opportunity to get us to River Avenue, which will be our primary resource for being able to provide a place for isolation and quarantine for people with COVID. So I don't see this, given our numbers of people who are ill in the county and the short time frame, I don't see this being a significant dollar commitment from our perspective.
Thank you very much.
Any other discussion? I'll just add that indemnity clauses and contracts are quite typical, and I wouldn't see that out of the norm. Without any other comments, oh, Commissioner Farr.
Just a quick comment. This is an ordinance. So what is the time frame the soonest that this could be enacted?
Steve Dingle, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. Chair Buck, Commissioner Farr, when Ms. Gaffney contacted me Sunday, I think it was, about this, I went through and I believe I sent it to Commissioner or to Chair Buck, but we have no in our charter emergency authority or a different process for adopting an ordinance. So it would follow the typical course. If we did a first reading on April 21st, we'd have to have a second reading and adoption at least 13 days after that. The one thing we could do is make the typically an ordinance doesn't take effect for 30 days. We could put an emergency clause in it, which would make it effective immediately. So you're looking at whatever the time frame would be after April 21st, if that were the first reading. So I think we're really at the first part of May. Latter part of
Thank
April.
you for that. And in that this is a bridge to River Avenue, I would expect we're going to have River Avenue up and operating at some level prior to the ordinance taking effect, which underscores the importance of the work that Elizabeth is undertaking right now in working with hotels to accept the temporary lodging situation. So thank you, Ms. Gaffney, and thank you, Mr. Dingle.
I see Commissioner Burney, then Commissioner Boswell.
I would just like to state that given that time frame, I hope and expect we will see significant partnership on behalf of hotels and the industry to make this almost moot. Not that we won't move forward and adopt it, because I believe we will. But again, this is an opportunity for us with that industry to step up right now, even before we have the chance to take official action.
Commissioner Boswell.
I was merely going to suggest the possibility of the board holding a short meeting next Tuesday in our down week to do the first reading of this ordinance, so it can be enacted in 2 weeks after that with an emergency clause.
I don't see an issue with that if that is the way that our health officials think we need to go.
I'll be home.
Well,
Glad I
prepared to let
asked.
I'm
So, Chair-
prepared to let the
Chair-
officers make that
Ms. Gaffney.
decision.
Chair Buck, I was just going to suggest that if you can leave that open-ended, that would give me an opportunity to consult with County Council about timing, and then we can follow up after that.
Very good. I don't think we have a date in the actual motion itself, and we can take that up under agenda setting as well. Any other comments regarding the motion we have right now? Commissioner Burney.
I move the motion.
We've got a move of the motion. I think we're there anyway, so I'll call a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those
Aye.
opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Very good. So we will move on to public comments. Thank you for all the attendees who've been so patient to move us through our COVID update and our emergency business for the morning. Usually we have public comment first thing. And in this case, it's a little bit different. So for all those that hung in there, thank you. And I'm going to have our moderator start our public comment period now.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. At this time, if you would like to participate in public comment, please raise your virtual hand. When I see your hand raised, I will call names, and everyone will be given 3 minutes for public comment. There will be a timer on the screen. The first person I see with their hands raised was Eric Jackson. Following Mr. Jackson will be Chris Mcallister. Mr. Jackson, I will unmute your mic and the timer will begin and you will be given 3 minutes for public comment. You should be unmuted, Mr. Jackson.
Commissioners, can you hear me? Yes? That's a yes. Okay, thank you. Hi, Eric Jackson. As you know, I've been very involved in the homeless community here in Eugene, specifically, and potentially some people in Springfield as well. I had somebody come to me this morning and they expressed that they had gone to the Lane County Fairgrounds as a non-resident or a non-person occupying a bed for food. Is the contract with St. Vincent's de Paul, and I also sent this in writing, is the contract with St. Vincent's de Paul allow for outside people that don't have a bed to acquire food there? And if not, would it be any reasonable thing for the county to make something available, perhaps there or elsewhere, with the lack of feeds that exist currently in the market? So we've lacked our Sunday feeds, we've lacked many of the weekday feeds. The dining room is down to bag lunch that I've heard is peanut butter and jelly. So it's not a well-rounded meal as if you were eating there, getting veggies and everything else. Is this something that the board would consider as a county-wide thing for stepping in and providing some additional food services? And I know you guys are trying to do outreach. As far as what I've heard today in the hour and 15 minutes, damages to a hotel, if we provide a signed contract by minors or senior or adults that would meet the provisions of the hotel stay, that if there was vandalism, they could in fact be charged with the misdemeanor of vandalism, and that hopefully, as with the forcing hotels, would never have to be applied because the concern might be enough to prevent vandalism and evictions from that lodging, which would be a deficit to the individual. So with those two things possibly in a contract, consider please applying them. And I thank you, and I hope you can answer any of those questions.
Thank you for your public comment, Mr. Jackson. Next up will be Chris Mcallister. Give me 1 moment to reset our timer and I will unmute Mr. Mcallister. Mr. Mcallister, you are now unmuted.
Good morning, commissioners. My name is Chris Mcallister. I live in Springfield, Ward 3. I want to first start off by saying thank you to the time and effort our staff are putting in, trying to create creative solutions and moving mountains in the face of this great pandemic. There are a lot of concerns in our community, but having this quick action and this action-oriented policy has helped alleviate some of those fears. In regards to some of the comments that Commissioner Burney said this morning regarding evictions, I have been helping try to navigate for people who have been threatened by Springfield Police, not by Springfield Police, but with Springfield Police to participate in evictions because people do not know the law. People do not know what rights have or have not been waived or put aside and whatnot. And even trying to call the sheriff, it's not an easy solution. It took 5 hours of calls back and forth to be able to get an understanding about what can and cannot be evicted in these times. And so we have to really come up with some kind of alternative to be able to show people that you can't leverage people without information. And so we need to get that information in the hands of the tenants, in the hands of the landlords, that you cannot break landlord-tenant rules by taking advantage of misinformation or lacking of information. So our people do have some protections, but there's not many of them. For-cause evictions can get people evicted, and there are not options for those people. Some people would rather just not deal with the process or put their hands in the trust of a system that doesn't recognize them a lot of times anyways. That said, I would really like to reaffirm, please open up county parks. We need shower access. In order to help this COVID response be accurate, we need people to be able to have access to bathrooms, to showers when they need them, not in small, short windows where there's a bunch of people grouped together in the same spots waiting for their showers. We can do this together or we can do this in silos, but I like Bridge Post and you guys have been helping bridge this community in our response. So thank you to Sarai Johnson, to Jocelyn Warren, to Ms. Gaffney, and Steve Mokryski for their diligent work trying to rally. And I also want to give a shout out to Springfield for trying to think outside the box too. We are all in this together, and thank you again for your time and your service. Stay happy, stay well, stay warm.
Thank you for your public comment, Mr. McAllister. Next up, we will have Johannes Tadeo. I apologize if I'm saying that incorrectly. Give me one moment to reset the timer, and your mic will be unmuted. You're unmuted now.
Hello, commissioners. My name is Johannes Tadeo. I work with Springfield Alliance for Equity and Respect. First off, I would like to thank you all for all the work that you are currently doing to make sure that we get through this pandemic. And I just want to be able to talk about the comments that Commissioner Bernie spoke about earlier about evictions. These families are our most vulnerable, one of our most vulnerable, which is our undocumented Latinx families that are being pushed out and being told that because they didn't pay last month's rent, that they have to be evicted. And a lot of these families, as you know, a lot of them got laid off, and they were told to prioritize their money to be able to pay different bills. Unfortunately, because they did that, now the landlords are taking advantage of these families and kicking them out within 2 weeks notice, not 30 days, 2 weeks. And just like Commissioner Bernie said, we had 35 families. From those families, we've done our best to be able to house as many folks as we could. The issue is, and the fear is, that because we house these folks in these areas, that it could violate their tenant contract and could cause them to end up being homeless as well. And yes, it is the lack of information that's going out to these areas. I am currently the only organizer and Latinx organizer here in Springfield. And we need to make sure that we're being clear and making sure that the tenants and the landlords know the current law. Right now we have 12 families on the street. Yesterday, we ended up housing we ended up separating a family because they only accepted women and children, and we ended up having to find a home for the husband. And it's really scary right now in the time where we don't know. These families were housed. They're from Springfield, and now don't know where to go. And our fear is that this is going to continue to keep happening unless we do something or make a statement and make it sure that these folks are clear on the information that it is due to the COVID-19. They're not just being evicted just to be evicted. They're being evicted because they can't pay. And yeah, so thank you again, and I hope we were able to find the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Next up, we will have Crystalline Frank. Give me one moment to reset the timer and I will unmute you. You may begin your public comment.
Hi, my name is Crystalline Frank. I'm with the Oregon Country Fair. I just would like to say thank you, commissioners, for allowing me to provide member input and for all the work you have done to flatten the curve. Speaking for the Oregon Country Fair, as well as personally, I am honored and inspired to be part of a community that is doing so much to support each other. Regarding the Oregon Country Fair, the current COVID-19 emergency is clearly a problem for our main event, as well as preparations for the event this year. We are asking for your help to ensure that the Oregon Country Fair can continue into the future. Thank you again for your time, and please stay safe.
At this time, I show that was our last public comment. If anyone else who has registered for the meeting would like to give public comment, please raise your hand at this time. I do not see anyone else raising their hand, so that will conclude our public comment. Thank you all for registering and attending.
Thank you, everybody that commented. Any remonstrances from commissioners? Commissioner Farr, was that a hand?
Negative. I was just touching my forehead.
Okay. Well, if I don't see anything from anybody else, I will, oh, Commissioner Burney.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to acknowledge all of the comments that were made. A couple of them obviously came from my district, and also obviously based on questions I've asked are really within the authority of the city of Springfield. I'm going to request, first I want to appreciate Mr. Tadeo's and Mr. Mcallister's comments and their work on the ground where people are. And I will request that somehow we alert the appropriate City of Springfield staff of where their testimony was, just so that the city can hear that, because it relates to their jurisdiction, and we are listening to that with empathy. I also know, as it relates to food in a variety of areas, we have a contract, I believe, an emergency contract, is my understanding, but with Food for Lane County. And it would be interesting to hear how they're maximizing their efforts to get food to areas which have not historically been distribution points for them, as more and more of our people are hungry. And that's really all of my comment. I think we already dealt with the larger issue for all events that are going to be canceled, and how we can make sure that they are held whole and continue into the future. Thank you.
Commissioner Farr, and then I see Mr. Mokar-Heisky had a comment.
I'll be very brief. Food for Lane County is experiencing shortages in their supply lines currently for obvious reasons. In fact, they have cut services to some of our Homes for Good facilities, some of the extra helping or fresh food service that they've been providing. So they're having difficulty meeting their standard obligations, let alone the extended obligations or extended needs that we see today. So it's a continuous effort, and thanks for bringing that up, Joe.
Mr. Mokar-Heisky.
Chair, I just wanted to respond a little bit to Commissioner Burney's question, as well as the questions raised under public comment about food for homeless individuals. The Lane County Fairgrounds Expo building has been made available. Ms. Gaffney shared an update for you both on the Expo as well as the Memorial Hall in Springfield that Lane County is paying for, I believe, for over a total of around 150 unhoused individuals between Eugene and Springfield. Their food is being served to those who are staying at those sites, but as we all know, the real goal of that effort is to create safe separation between individuals. And so both sites really are designed to keep people in place and not to create movements in and out, and having new people coming in just for food and then leaving. So that's not a public health best practice to allow for folks that are not staying there to come just for the food service. It is important to note that Eugene and Springfield are working on ways to get food and other resources out to people at other sites. So Ms. Gaffney mentioned the street outreach that Eugene is working on doing. I believe they launched that effort yesterday. In addition, Food for Lane County is working with the faith communities and others to coordinate getting food out to people who need it. So that really is, there continue to be the Lindholm Center and our sites for people. The Lindholm Center is a drop-in for a certain number of people. Our sites that we're operating for people that are staying there, and then for others in the community, we really are trying to make efforts to do outreach and provide food directly to them as opposed to having them congregate in large groups.
Any other remonstrance or comments? I don't see any. I'll add in response to the discussions regarding evictions or people getting evicted for non-payment of rent. It is absolutely against the law during this pandemic to evict people for non-payment of rent. When I hear that is happening, it makes me furious because that is absolutely against the law. And if people are being forced from their homes within 2 weeks without a court order, that is also against the law. The city of Eugene has a rental housing code, and that for those folks that are within the city limits is an avenue in which to call when these things happen so that they can get assistance. To my knowledge, the city of Springfield does not have the equivalent, in which case recourse for these people is nearly non-existent. And trying to go through the court system at this time in order to stay in their homes is got to be challenging at the very best, if not available at all. I would encourage that the city of Springfield contemplate something very similar to the Eugene City Rental Housing Code for tenants. That certainly won't happen most likely in time for this particular pandemic, but these are the exact circumstances in which there are agencies that do that kind of work. Otherwise, their avenues are extremely limited. There are some legal advocates in town that can help, but if they don't know who they are, there's no way to contact them. So trying to get them in contact with those advocates would be greatly helpful, because I don't want to hear that people are being evicted for non-payment of rent in this time of a pandemic. There's got to be, damage upon damage that should not be happening. With that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Sorensen.
Now I'm unmuted.
There you go. And it looks like we have one more public comment after you that forgot to raise their hand.
I was going to mention that last week, I believe it was, I brought up the need to assist renters as a group, and that we need to get on top of the numbers of renters in the county. And now we hear about these incidents, and Commissioner Burney's incident is similar to one that I heard, although yours is, Commissioner Burney, yours is bigger in terms of the numbers of people. But this was a family that was forcibly evicted by their landlord, and the landlord just showed up with a pickup truck and started throwing the renter's stuff out in the driveway. And so it wasn't exactly a legal eviction even. It was just basically the landlord breaking into the house and ordering the people out. The only thing they could do is call the police. The police came and they warned the landlord that he would be arrested if he didn't leave the property. So I think that my request last week, and now hearing about this incident in Springfield, and Commissioner Buck, your summary of the current eviction law and how it's probably being violated, I think we ought to think about whether the county should get its own resources to protect these renters. And in terms of our former and deep history on this is we used to have a consumer affairs program in Lane County. And to me, these incidents, warrant us taking a much more knowledgeable and aggressive stance in protecting these renters. I think we're only just beginning to see the impact, because a lot of these renters are victims of the whole economic fallout of the COVID-19. And I've gotten calls from, former fast food employees, former restaurant employees who are facing non-payment of rent and ultimately eviction. So I think we need to step up our response to this and not just say it's a city issue, when in fact it's really a people issue and it's affecting people all over Lane County. Thanks.
Any other remonstrances? So for now, I will go back to our moderator for one more public comment.
Thank you, Chair Buck. We have, well, 1 second, let me get this back up. We have one more public comment. I apologize that it looks like your hand went down. Joshua Caraco, I will unmute your mic and your timer will begin.
Can you all hear me?
You are unmuted.
Okay, my name is Joshua Caraco. I am the director of the hotline at the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association. It would take me 3 minutes to explain the eviction moratorium to you or more, so I won't. It does not cover everything, but as several comments have explained already, merely having a moratorium in place is not enough to make sure that it is enforced. And on top of that, it is only temporary. And there's going to be a lot that needs to be done at the end of this, and we should start considering this now. Also, I don't speak Spanish, so that is a concern. But let me give you the numbers that keep me up at night. I would like to remind everyone that we were in a housing crisis. We were in a housing emergency. The state decided that before the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, luckily, the cities of Eugene and Springfield are currently in their consolidated planning process, so we have ample data about this. Before the pandemic, there were about 28,805 renter households in Eugene and Springfield, just the metropolitan area, earning less than 80% of the area median income. 3/4 of them were housing cost burdened, spending more than 1/3 of their income on their housing expenses. 1/3 of them were spending more than 50% of their income on housing expenses per month. This is before the pandemic. The TAC report identified that we have a growing homeless population, and then we have a poverty to severe poverty homelessness pipeline before the pandemic. The service industry, some data, just there you go, from the consolidated plan that's actually Lane County level, says that there were about 33,304 persons employed in the service industry before the pandemic, with the lowest median income of any other sector at $15,485, which is lower than 125% of the federal poverty level. Poverty is a pre-existing condition, whether it's categorized that way or not, and renters are disproportionately in every other vulnerable population is already disproportionately renters. My job, which is currently volunteer, as we've only applied for our first set of funding a few weeks ago, and it will be very competitive, has doubled since the beginning of this crisis. And a lot of that has been getting information out about the eviction moratorium. And we still receive calls about this. Now, there are many things. We appreciate the chair and the mayor's letter to the governor, but more will need to be done. And a few months from now, when that moratorium is lifted, there are tens of thousands of people who will, by our own systems, as they are currently set, be placed into crippling, inescapable debt. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. That looks like our last public comment. Any final remonstrance before we move on to our next item? I don't see any. Oh, Commissioner Burning.
I just very quickly wanted to thank Mr. Caraco. I found those statistics very powerful. Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you, everybody that made the time to be able to call in and comment on this virtual platform. We greatly appreciate it, and we absolutely want to hear from you. I'm very interested in the tenant issue, and I know that we have it on a future work session item that we'll be discussing at our agenda meeting soon. So with that, we will move on to item 6, the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved. So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Burney, second by Commissioner Bozovich. Any discussion? I see none, so we'll move to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move to item 7A, Health and Human Services, Order 20-04-07-02, in the matter of approving 2 contracts and 14 amendments and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign approved contracts and amendments. Ms.
Morning, Chair Buck, Commissioners. It's me again, I guess I would say on this. As part of my day job at Health and Human Services, I'm bringing a quick item for approval of contracts and amendments. As you know, whenever we have new contracts, we don't put those on consent calendar and instead bring those before the board and have the opportunity for some discussion and questions on those. There are 2 new contracts that are part of this board order that I would lift up, and then of course I'm happy to answer questions on any of them or the 14 amendments that are included in this as well. The first new contract is with Pacific Source, their CCO for system of care coordination, and this is a revenue contract for the county. This is a role in helping the county provides the coordination for what's referred to as our system of care. What that means is it's our collaborative effort across the community to coordinate the needs for our highest risk youth. So our system of care includes representatives from the school system, from child mental health providers, from the juvenile justice system, from our poverty and homelessness partners, and I'm missing a whole host of other partners who serve those highest need youth in our community. Because we now have 2 CCOs in the community, that work is being shared collaboratively across both CCOs and the county. So the county is doing the coordination under contract. We have a separate contract with Trillium as well to provide that service. So that's the first new contract. And then the second new contract is really exciting to me to be able to lift up, and that's with Shelter Care, which is for services related to our commons on MLK. And that, I know in the face of the pandemic, I've been very focused around how do we contain the spread of disease. And while that's important, I think it is also important to not lose sight of the great work that's happening in the community moving forward to address some of our other critical needs. And one of those certainly is the construction of our commons on MLK. And if you haven't been out MLK lately, I would encourage you to take a look at the link that we have on the web that has a camera that Homes for Good has installed to allow us to track on progress. So this particular contract is to put in place the service delivery aspect of the permanent supportive housing. So the construction creates the building, and Homes for Good will ensure that there's on-site management for that. And the other part that really makes permanent supportive housing work as a successful strategy is that we have service delivery that we can wrap around our people who are chronically homeless and living there. So this awards that contract to Shelter Care. And again, there are many other amendments, and I'm happy to answer any questions people might have.
Commissioner Farr.
I'll be ever so brief, even though I'd like to be anything but brief regarding the response to the passage of this motion. If you look down this, it is a herald of the good work that is occurring in our Health and Human Services Department, including a number of contracts for regarding services to youth, including youth mentoring and other critical services that Lane County is continuing to march on, even through the attention that we have to pay to the current pandemic. So, Ms. Gaffney, thank you for bringing these to us. I wish we could talk more about them. Each one of them is deserving of a discussion. And not just the MLK contract with Shelter Care Services. So all of this is wonderful stuff. If you have a chance to read through it, anybody who may be watching this, take note of the work of Lane County Health and Human Services that continues even while emergency services are being prioritized.
Any other comments, questions regarding this order? I see none, so I'd entertain a motion to approve Order 20-04-07-02 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Burney, second by Commissioner Farr. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. So we'll move on now to, we have a number of public works items. Given our time, we're just shy of 11 o'clock. I think we can move through items A and B, and we'll most likely move items C and D to the afternoon. So first, we'll start with item A, the first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing, ordinance 20-02, in the matter of amending the Lane County Code to adopt revised Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, flood insurance rate maps, FIRM, along Lane County coastal areas and code amendments to Lane County 16.244 floodplain combining zone, FP-RCP, rural compensation plan, and LC 10-271 floodplain combining district, FP, code amendment proposal regarding adding coastal high hazard area development and regulations, and order 20-04-07-03 in the matter of amending Chapter 11 of the Lane Manual to adopt revised flood hazard data to include flood insurance rate maps and flood insurance study along Lane County coastal areas. So with us, it looks like we have Deanna Wright, Associate Planner.
Good morning, Chair and Board of Commissioners. This is Staff Planner Deanna Wright speaking. Staff's requesting a first reading and setting the second reading for April 21st, 2020. This agenda item consists of a legislative amendment to revise Lane County's flood hazard data in the coastal areas in order to comply with the National Flood Insurance Program. Staff will present a full staff report and a PowerPoint presentation during the second reading on this item. There's also going to be an opportunity for public participation during the hearing on April 21st. The board packet is available for anyone to review on the board's agenda website. This does conclude my discussion at this point.
Chair Buck, if I may.
Please.
Andy Clark here from the County Council Office. I just want to note for the record one quick typo that's in the title to the ordinance. It reads Rural Compensation Plan. That should be Rural Comprehensive Plan, of course. I just want to make sure that's clear in the record so we don't have to do yet another reading on this. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, this is Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. Deanna, can you clarify for me, because I was following some floodplain updates through the code process that included some increases in freeboard that I was interested in having happen for residential structures, but apparently my understanding is that that has been kind of peanut buttered into everything, needing two extra feet of freeboard. Is this particular ordinance cover that issue, or is this specifically just to bring in this coastal hazard area and the new maps?
Commissioner, there's two floodplain projects going on currently. There's the one floodplain project that is for policy proposal changes that may include some differences in freeboard. But for this item, it's just exclusive to adopting the flood hazard revised data for the coastal areas. So that would be from Mapleton to the coast, to the North County border and South County border. So that other item for the potential policy you'll see that later on this, I think in a couple months from now.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that was clear because have some concerns with what was proposed in that draft ordinance, the second one you talked to, the policy one, because it was going to start applying to gravel mines and a whole bunch of stuff that probably is not, shouldn't be included. And I guess we'll comment on that then. With that then, if I have no further questions.
Any other comments or questions for our first reading? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the first reading of ordinance 20-02 and setting the second reading and public hearing for April 21st at 1:30 p.m. time certain, with the correction of the statement within the title of Rural Comprehensive Plan and order 20-04-07-03.
So moved and moved with great appreciation to the chair for reading the orders.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Verney, second by Commissioner Bozovich. Any discussion? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair. But clarification: we're moving the first reading and setting the second reading on 2002. And are we passing 2004-07-03, the order, or is that being moved also? That's not being moved. That's being passed at this time. Is that right?
I think they are together. Ms. Wright, can you clarify? I think they're together for a second reading.
Okay.
Correct. The order
Okay, good. Thank you.
and the first, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's clear.
Any other questions or comments? With that, I don't see any, so I'm ready for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those
Aye.
opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. So we'll move into item 8B, which is a discussion and update on Lane County's 2020 Community Wildfire Protection Plan. We have with us Rachel Surslev, our county planner.
Good morning, commissioners. Thank you, Chair. Let me just get set up here. Oh. And can we all see the PowerPoint now?
Yes.
All right. So like I said, thank you. This is Rachel Surslev, planner. I have with me here today Alex Ramlow from the Oregon Department of Forestry and Lauren Grand from Oregon State University, and they're going to assist me in presenting on this topic. And we are here today to give you an update on the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, which is being updated this year in 2020. Staff and partners were before you to introduce this project last March, and we're back today to provide an update on the progression of the project in preparation for adoption of the plan. And so a quick overview of today's presentation. Alex is going to provide some background on community wildfire protection plans, which is a mouthful, so we're likely going to refer to them as CWPP. And he will also give some general updates on the current milestones that the steering committee has made on the plan update to date. And then I will turn it over to Lauren Grand, who is going to provide some information on the Landowner Survey and the results from that survey. And then I'm going to finish up with a discussion about the updated risk assessment and what the next steps for the project are. And lastly, we'll allow some time for questions and discussions from the commissioners. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Alex.
All right, good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. This is Alex Romel with the Oregon Department of Forestry. Can you guys all hear me?
Yes.
Great. All right. So what is a CWPP? Again, that's that Community Wildfire Protection Plan. It is a collaborative plan, and the goal there is really to just help plan, identify, and prioritize mitigation strategies pre-wildfire incidents. This plan has been collaboratively developed with Lane County, Oregon Department of Forestry, the Fire Defense Board, and we have been engaging our federal stakeholders as well, U.S. Forest Service and BLM, in the development of this plan. All right, so the development of these strategies really does help both meet funding eligibility requirements and ensure that how funding is spent is effective across the landscape. And so some of these, approximately $1 million a year comes in to the county through fuels reduction programs. The majority of that is federally funded. We do also have some Title III funding through retrofitting infrastructure, and that's about $300,000 to $400,000 per year. So we're talking about 1.5 million, and that's non-federal. So that doesn't include federal restoration projects. And so that's really what this plan seeks to do, is ensure that those $1.5 million per year are invested strategically, have the largest impact they can, and also meet the funding eligibility requirements to make them as competitive in the application process. All right, next slide. Okay, so like Rachel said, we were here a little over a year ago, and that's when we introduced the project. And one of the things we said there was we were going to focus on quote unquote low-hanging fruit, easily implementable actions to address. And so that is what we've been working hard on over the past year. The three main things that we're looking at, and majority, we're kind of wrapping these up right now, are the wildfire risk assessment. The last assessment data we had was actually done in-house through Lane County in 2005. This CWPP update will include quantitative wildfire risk assessment for a landscape scale in the Pacific Northwest from a U.S. Forest Service funded mapping project in 2017. So that's quite an update into where the risk is on our landscape, and we'll get into that when we review some of the maps. The other thing that we did is we wanted to recreate the Landowner Survey that was completed in 2005, and so Lauren Grant will be going into some of the initial results from that. The final is to review and add to 2005 action items. So we're in the process of doing that right now, and now that we have Landowner Survey and the risk assessment mapping information, those are going to help guide what our priorities are for implementation over the next 5-year plan period. The other thing that we did, we're kind of working on completing here, is the hazardous fuel subcommittee. And this committee has actually been drafting recommendations for the update to lane fire siting codes. We're wrapping that up here shortly, but the main thing that we're focusing on there is the dead fuel component, which wasn't, we felt it wasn't identified as well as it could have been in the current code. And then we're really focusing on vertical separation between fuel layers, so surface fuel and canopy fuel. And you guys should see that from Lane County, or you'll see our recommendations here definitely at the next update or through the fire siting process that you guys have going concurrently. And that wraps up my general update. Next slide, Rachel. I think we can hand it over to Lauren.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Good morning, Commissioners. My name's Lauren Grand, and I'm the OSU Extension Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Agent in Lane County. I help to facilitate the landowner survey that will be used to inform the updated CWPP. And we did a survey because the success of Lane County CWPP is dependent on the involvement and input of our local stakeholders. It's our belief that a plan that accurately reflects the community's interests and priorities will have a greater legitimacy and success in implementing the recommended actions. Next slide, please. Okay. The purpose of our landowner survey was to gain information about how Lane County landowners in rural and wildland urban interface areas perceive the potential risk of wildfire and gain information about their attitudes towards risk reduction and preparedness strategies. The survey results can also be used to focus public outreach activities aimed at wildfire risk reduction and loss prevention. Additional benefits from the survey include education and informing the public, and incorporating public values into decision-making, improving the quality of decisions, and building trust in the planning process. Okay, next slide, please. The survey was disseminated in 3 ways. First, the survey was sent to a random sample of 5,125 rural landowners in Lane County in July and August of 2019. The landowners received a postcard with information letting them know they were going to receive a survey, as well as information on how to take that survey online if they so choose. Then a few weeks later, they received a second mailing with a survey included that they could take a paper survey and mail it back to us in a prepaid envelope. The Lane Council of Governments Regional Information Database served as the survey sample frame, which is where we got the addresses and information of who was in the county. And postcards were also handed out at events such as the Lane County Fair. Lastly, landowners were asked to participate in the survey via some social media channels from the Lane County outlets, including Facebook. The CWPP committee received 1,550 valid survey responses, which it gave us a 23% response rate. Next slide, please. So the survey included 5 main themes, which you see here on your screen. The first was getting some information about the characteristics of our respondents. The second theme was wildland fire risk awareness and communication. The third, fire protection and preparedness. The fourth, reducing wildland fire risk on property. And the fifth was reducing community risk to wildfire. Next slide, please. So most of the remainder of the slides, I'll be discussing some of the key findings or the data that we collected from the survey. And they're organized by the themes mentioned on the previous slide, which are in orange at the top of each of the slide, so that you can sort of keep track of where the data falls within our themes. The majority of respondents own their home at 94%, and were year-round residents of Lane County, 95% of them. 5% of landowners primarily use their property for business purposes. 5% of landowners for business purposes, and of those, 62% indicated that they use the property for agriculture or forest industries. Next slide, please. When asked about wildland fire risk on their property and in their neighborhoods and around their communities, over half, 77% of respondents perceived their property as a medium to high risk for wildland fires. Respondents perceived their neighbors' properties to have a similar or higher risk, but their communities tend to have a lower risk than their own. Next slide, please. An important component of the landowner survey was gathering data on effective means of wildland fire information dispersal. The survey asked respondents how they received information about property protection in the past, as well as preferences for receiving information into the future. The survey respondents reported that in the past, they had received most of their information from news media, fact sheets, and local fire departments and rural fire departments. However, 19% of respondents reported they had not received information about property protection. Respondents identified mail, fact sheets, internet, and fire departments and rural fire departments as their top 4 preferred methods for receiving information into the future. Next slide, please. And that graph was showing preferred for the future. The survey also asked landowners about emergency preparedness, more specifically about evacuation procedures. The majority, or 88% of the respondents, did not know or had not received information about community evacuation procedures during a wildland fire. And 59% of respondents indicated they had not had a personal household evacuation plan in the case of a wildland fire emergency. Next slide, please. The survey also gathered information from landowners about specific measures they have already taken to reduce the risk of wildland fire on their property. The majority of respondents, that's 89%, indicated that they have taken measures to reduce losses associated with wildland fire. The most frequently reported measures of those who have taken strategies to reduce risk were reducing vegetation near structures and regularly cleaning roof and gutters of debris. Fewer property owners reported implementing the measures that required higher financial investment, such as investing in widening roads, sprinkler systems, and chimney spark arresters, for example. Next slide, please. The survey asked landowners about their willingness to take different actions to reduce potential impacts of wildland fire on their own personal property. So these are future actions. The majority of respondents indicated they are likely to reduce vegetation and debris at 79% and create defensible zones around their structures at 65%. And following what we saw on the last slide, respondents were less likely, but still somewhat likely to improve emergency access or use fire-resistant building materials. Next slide. The survey asked landowners which incentives, if any, would motivate them to take these additional steps to protect their property from wildland fire. The highest percent of respondents indicated that insurance discounts at 70% and tax breaks, 69%, would motivate them to implement risk reduction steps. About half respondents indicated that grant programs would encourage better protection measures. And then the participants who identified in the other category indicated needing help with physical labor, large machinery such as a chipper, financial assistance, and then more education on what to do, and or some of them just felt it was their own responsibility to do the work. Next slide, please. So the questions in the section for reducing community risk to wildland fire help to inform policy decisions by providing better understanding of the level of landowner support for different approaches. Respondents indicated their level of support for 4 methods of hazardous fuels treatments in their communities. The treatments included no action at all, mechanical thinning, prescribed burning, and chemical treatments. Of the 4, the 2 preferred methods of hazardous fuels reduction were mechanical thinning at 93% and prescribed burning at 73%. And respondents were generally unsupportive of chemical treatments, 54%, and were extremely unsupportive of no action being taken to reduce hazardous fuels at 78%. Next slide, please. The survey also asked landowners about their opinions and the importance of different planning priorities for wildland fire. The majority of respondents indicated that each of the planning priorities listed were very or somewhat important. Protecting critical infrastructure, reducing damaged utilities, and educating landowners were the priorities that ranked the highest. And of the priorities listed, respondents indicated that restoring forests to natural conditions and protecting historical and cultural landmarks were of least importance. Next slide, please. There are a number of regulatory and non-regulatory activities that communities can implement to reduce wildland fire. Respondents indicated the highest level of support at 95% for public information strategy. 82% or greater of respondents were very or somewhat supportive of 4 out of the 5 regulatory strategies listed. The most popular were access roadway guidelines and access roadway guidelines for new development in high hazard areas. Of the risk reduction strategies listed in the survey, respondents indicated that the least support for requiring new rural residential developments to be within rural fire protection district boundaries, public acquisition of land in high hazard areas, and while there was still 50% support, the lowest was the development of a tax service district to fund preventative wildfire reduction work and education. Next slide, please. Okay, so several common themes emerged from the landowner survey. Overall, Layton County residents perceive their properties and neighborhoods to have a moderate to high risk to rural and wildland urban interface fire. Information sharing with local communities is especially important due to the large scale of Layton County. And respondents reported public information sharing was the most important strategy for reducing community risk to wildland fire. Although fire prevention education programs exist, 1/5 of landowners surveyed indicate that they are not receiving any information. Community outreach results identified a need for improved dissemination of educational activities regarding fire risk. Educational messages should come from trusted sources, such as Oregon State University Extension, Fire Protection Districts, and Oregon Department of Forestry. And information should be distributed through the preferred methods identified in the Landowner Survey, including mail, fact sheets, and brochures, internet, and television. Next slide, please. The Landowner Survey results indicate support for incentive programs such as tax breaks and insurance benefits as an effective non-regulatory approaches to increasing participation in wildland fire mitigation activities.
In the Oregon Wildfire Risk Explorer data, which, as Alex earlier mentioned, was data collected in collaboration by Oregon Department of Forestry and the U.S. Forest Service. And this tool provides a wildfire risk assessment for the entire state and acts as a resource for local communities to use in the creation of their CWPP. The Risk Explorer is the most current data. It's quantitative, peer-reviewed risk assessment data, and that's why the steering committee chose to rely on this data to update the risk assessment. The purpose of updating the risk assessment was mainly to use this current data to make new wildfire risk maps and a new wildland urban interface, or WUI map, for Lane County. And further, these maps will help more accurately assess risk in the county to ensure that the plan contains relevant goals and action items for the future. The updated maps are intended to supplement the 2005 risk assessment. The steering committee recognizes that a significant amount of work was done in 2005 in the 2005 risk assessment, and that work was very specific and valuable to Lane County. So our focus here is not to entirely replace that risk assessment, but to incorporate the current data into that risk assessment and update it with the most current data so that it's more applicable to reality and what type of wildfire risk we're seeing currently. So how we are viewing this data, I'll talk about the assessment area map, which you can see on the slide. Because the Oregon wildfire risk data is available for the entire state and all of Lane County, the steering committee had to decide how we were going to break this data down and how it would be best viewed. As demonstrated by this map, Lane County is broken down into 3 assessment areas that are the ecoregions that exist within Lane County. And these are level 3 watersheds and can generally be described as the coast, valley, and Cascades. These assessment areas were chosen to accommodate the scale of the data. The data is not intended to be viewed at a site-specific scale, but instead was intended at a jurisdictional scale for cities or counties. And because Lane County is so large, we found that it was reasonable to break the data out into the ecoregions. And the implication of this is that Each of the new maps that are being made are being broken down into these assessment areas in order to more specifically evaluate the data. So first, I'll talk about the overall wildfire risk map. And the overall wildfire risk map demonstrates wildfire throughout the county, which is the likelihood and consequence of wildfire on all mapped highly valued resources and assets. So this data looks at critical infrastructure, residential housing unit density, timber resources, and other assets, and shows wildfire risk in relation to them. On this map, you'll see high, moderate, and low risk or potential benefit is how wildfire risk is represented. And here we have the wildfire risk map. And you'll see that the areas of red are high wildfire risk, areas of blue are moderate, and green is low risk or potential benefit. Potential benefit may seem strange to see on a risk map, but wildfire can be beneficial to certain habitats, forest health, and vegetation condition. So that's why those areas are shown. And they also do contain low risk, but some potential benefit. And most of the high risk areas in Lane County, as seen by this map, occur in the Cascades ecoregion due to higher elevation and steeper slopes, as well as more vegetative fuels in this area. So I would say that that's the main takeaway from this risk map. However, an in-depth analysis of this map is going to be in the updated plan, and it will focus on identifying areas and communities that have high wildfire risk in order to focus on mitigation strategies. The next map that we updated as a part of this risk assessment is the Lane County Wildland Urban Interface Map, or a WUI map. And a WUI is the area where residential development meets or intermingles with forest lands. And on this WUI map, there are interface and intermix areas. Interface can be described as areas where development is adjacent to forest lands, where intermix has development within those forest lands. And the WUI map presents interface and intermix areas based on varying levels of development density. So taking a look at Lane County's WUI map, the WUI in Lane County is quite expansive given the residential development is dispersed throughout the county, and a lot of that development is close to vegetative fuels. Because of this, in 2005, the WUI map was basically the entire county. And so we've updated this map in order to provide more specificity, and it focuses the WUI areas. So you'll see that interface areas are adjacent to urban centers, such as Eugene Springfield, and then south along I-5 corridor and out near Florence. And these areas, like I said earlier, are interface, and so they're adjacent to forest lands, whereas the intermix areas are the dark blue and the light green areas on the map. And those are where development is intermixed into forest lands, and they are separated out to show the difference in development density. So that darker blue has a medium density, while the light green has a lower density. And again, in the risk assessment in the plan, each of these ecoregions will be evaluated separately, and we'll be looking at the WUI areas for each ecoregion. So these two maps are going to be the main focus of the risk assessment, and they'll include, again, that breakdown of the data by the ecoregions. In addition, there will be a couple other maps that we are updating the risk assessment with. One that will show the impact of wildfire on resources such as wildlife, vegetation, and timber. And then we'll also have a map that shows priority areas based on qualitative information from the fire districts. And ultimately, these maps will be used for identifying communities and areas that are at risk to wildfire for the purpose of focusing mitigation strategies and projects. And so that is all I have on the risk assessment. So I'm going to hand it back to Alex to wrap up. Alex,
All
are
right.
you there?
I am, yep. Thanks, Rachel. So those risk maps, again, are what you saw there are two, and for the majority of those are going to be broken down by ecoregions. So the Lane County CWPP will actually have, for each of those maps that you saw, there'll be 3 maps, each focusing a little finer scale on the ecoregion. And that WUI map is actually much more informative than the original 2005, which was the entire county. So we're pretty excited about the level of detail that we have on that WUI map. In terms of next steps, we are going to be incorporating landowner survey data and these risk assessment maps to help define new action items over the next 5 years. One thing that you may have seen in the 2005 CWPP is we had about 30 action items, and we're in the process of reviewing those right now. But one thing we are leaning towards for this 2020 update is to identify a top 5 action item list. We didn't get through the majority of those 30 since the last update, and what we really want to do is identify priority actions to really help guide implementation rather than a shotgun approach. The hazardous fuel subcommittee recommendations, again, I mentioned that we're in the process of that, and not wanting to step on other folks' toes here, we're going to wait for that to go through the channels at Lane County Land Management. But we are finalizing that, and we should have that to your Lane County planners here in the next week or two. We still need to format and assemble the plan document, and that's part of the expense that you saw on the board packet, which is part-time help just getting formatting and making sure we've got all of our boxes checked on that. Originally, we had planned to come back to you guys in early June for plan adoption, and we've since pushed that to July 7th, which will give us until early June to submit those plan documents. I think that's pretty much all I had for now. I guess a quick note that Patience Winningham, the county emergency manager, we have been talking a little bit, but with this COVID thing, I think we've pushed back our timeline a little bit, and that's in hopes that she'll have the chance to weigh in before we need to submit this for adoption. So with that, I appreciate the time this morning, focusing on wildfire risk. I know it seems, maybe a little out of context, but it is right around the corner, and ODF is looking at how to best prepare for wildfire response in the face of this new social distancing, which could be challenging. So thank you all very much, and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I know that we're in the middle of a pandemic, but we do need to think about wildfire coming shortly in the season. I apologize for the cat in the background. I cannot control her, and sometimes she thinks this is her meeting. So in light of that,
are you trying to herd cats on top of
yeah, for sure.
dealing with cats?
I want to open it up for comments to this, but I also want to put a little thing in your ear to think about while we're doing comments, which is we have local access roads as our next item. We have a half an hour, but we could push it into the noon hour to get through it if you'd like, or we'll have a longer afternoon. I'm kind of leaning towards pushing it into the noon hour, but Commissioner Farr.
I'm not opposed to that. I do have an HSC board chair meeting, committee chair meeting at noon today. I can be late for that.
Okay. With that, let's make sure that we have some comment time for our wildfire protection plan. Any comments, Commissioner Boswich?
Thank you. I guess a couple quick comments. One, looking at our wildfire risk map that they've got out there. It looks like a lightning strike map also for Lane County. But one of our biggest risk for wildfire in this area is human caused. And it's surprising me to not see like roads and where humans are identified as higher risk, and that risk because a lot of our starts, have been adjacent to roadways. The fire down there in Lorraine was a road caused fire, and access roads out to the high pass area led to that fire. Also, Sayusa River Road led to the Yellow Point fire. So kind of that little issue about roads and humans and whether there's any consideration of where they are versus higher risk. And I guess when we say risk, can Rachel or Alex address, is that risk of loss of life or risk of loss of property? Because risk is about loss. So what are we trying to protect, life or property?
Rachel, this is Alex. I could
go ahead.
Okay, it's actually so. What this risk is actually displaying is the risk of large fires occurring. I believe it's over. There's a certain threshold. I want to say it's 200 acres. So the risk is if you get a start, what's the risk that it turns into a large fire that is kind of over that 10-acre minimum?
Thank you. That helps me a lot because one of the things and some of the folks at Eugene Springfield Fire used to sweat about was the South Hills of Eugene facing north in the summertime when it blows a gale down the valley, and somebody down low in one of those wooded neighborhoods doing something stupid during fire season and having something run up the hill, and it'd be more of an issue of loss of life and probably a fire of less than 10 acres. So that allows me to understand what we're trying to map here. So I appreciate that definition.
Yeah, I'll add to, on the slide, I showed the map at the county scale, which really doesn't allow us to see specificity on that map, which is why, again, we chose to break them out in the ecoregions, which does help see some areas of higher risk that are adjacent to human development. But I think, again, it goes back to the scale that we're looking at and the scale of this data, which it's mapping wildfire risk per about 250 acres, I think it was. And so we're really not able to see that level of specificity in terms of human development. But it is, you are able to see it in some areas of the county on that map.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, I don't see any. Well, thank you very much for the presentation. And we'll see you back here in sounds like a couple of months, is that right?
Yep, July 7th is when we'll be back.
Very good. Well, thank you. With that, does everybody agree to move on to item C? Might push us into noon hour a little bit, but we can get through it. See some head nods. Okay, we'll do it. So item C is a work session on local access roads, and with us is Dan Hurley, our Director of Public Works.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Good morning, Commissioners. Can you all hear me? Somebody nod? Okay, great. All right, joining me today, I have Sasha Vartanian. She's our Transportation Planning Program Supervisor, Peggy Kepler, our County Engineer, and Jim Chaney, our Assistant County Counsel. And our item today is a follow-up work session on the topic of local access roads. And for folks who are listening in or may not be familiar with a local access road, these are roads that are dedicated to public use, but they are not publicly funded for maintenance. We started discussing LARs several months ago, largely due to the continuing safety risks that these pose to the public without continuing maintenance. And the conversation was largely driven due to failures that were going on at Collard Lake Road that were presenting some serious public safety issues. After some preliminary analysis, it was determined that Collard Lake was an outlier in the number of residences that it served, and we brought an item to the board for your consideration. The board took action to bring Collard Lake Road into the county road system. Since that board action, Sasha Vartanian has continued to lead our LAR project to conduct an in-depth analysis of our LARs, and she's developed some recommendations along with staff to share with you today for your consideration that could address some of the continuing problems that LARs present moving forward. And then following Sasha's presentation, Matt Tarnoff will be presenting an order for your consideration requesting authorized use of road fund money for code enforcement efforts on local access roads due to ongoing issues we're having regarding abandoned vehicles and other illegal roadside activities. With that, I'll pass to Sasha to start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Dan. Chair Buck and Commissioners, I'm actually going to hand off to Jim Cheney to review for you quickly an overview and a reminder of exactly what LARs are and what they mean for Lane County.
Thank you, Sasha. Chair Buck, Commissioners, this is Jim Cheney. You have on your screen the LAR definition in the Lane Code, and I won't reread that to you, but I'll say that any road that the public has a right to go on that's inside the county, anything but a private road is a public road. The state and federal government claim jurisdiction over a few of those, and that leaves the rest of the roads as being either roads that were originally adopted by the county as being of importance to transport, or other roads that the public was given a right to go on that are outside cities. Basically, the county stands in for the rights of the public on these local access roads that weren't accepted by the counties. Inside the cities, the city then steps in and for the public's interest in these roads. Now, just because the counties are both within the county's jurisdiction doesn't mean the county is responsible for everything on both of them. Because the county roads were dedicated and formally accepted by the county as being necessary for transportation and traffic, they're therefore maintained. But LARs, on the other hand, were dedicated to the public. The public was given a right to use them, but they primarily serve and benefit the property owners who get their access from them. Essentially, what they do is they provide a means by which a property owner can subdivide property, and then she or he can provide access to the subdivided property to the individual lots. So since LARs were never accepted by the county, while we have jurisdiction over the safety, use, and drainage of water on them, the maintenance responsibility falls exclusively on the property owners who benefit from them. Many of these were not well constructed or are not well maintained, but the Oregon law, as you can see in the definition on the screen, prohibits the county from spending money on them unless there's public use of the road, the director recommends it, or there's an order or resolution. Next slide, please. So what it boils down to, two kinds of roads in the county. One, primary purpose to carry traffic, and another type, the LAR, is to provide access to local property. There are currently 530 individual LARs in Lane County that total 121 miles in length. These roadways were built over many decades, typically privately, to gain access to one or more properties. Over time, certain roads became public roads as a matter of public record, but some have never been accepted, all these, into the county maintained road system. Sasha?
Thank you. So really just to summarize the issue before you, many of the LARs in the county are substandard with respect to the county's road design standards. And it has been long enough since the majority of these have been constructed that many of them built since the mid-1960s, that there's substantial deferred maintenance. In a sense, LARs really are not much different than alleyways in the city. They provide access to the properties that they serve, but are not designed for traffic. And as we know, the level of development, maintenance, and usability of alleys and LARs varies widely depending upon how much the adjacent property owner wants to invest in them. And hence leads us to the inventory that we've been working on in order to get a better understanding of the full extent of the conditions of LARs in Lane County and to help inform future policy changes. So before you see a list of the items that we've worked on inventorying, a lot of this data was available via our Geographic Information System, GIS, and some of it through our Road Management Information System, RMIS. But some of this data required further investigation and in-person field investigation. In order to do this, we selected LARs based on a number of criteria because there are 530 LARs, that's more than the bandwidth that our staff could physically go out and inventory them this last winter. So we broke it up, the inventory, up between LARs outside of urban growth boundaries and LARs inside of urban growth boundaries because of the distinct difference between the two. Those within urban growth boundaries, once fully annexed, automatically turn into city streets. So we selected a different level of criteria for those. For those outside of urban growth boundaries, we looked at those that are paved, and then we looked at those that might have an average daily trips of 100 or more, and we did a rough estimate based on number of parcels, the number of other streets connecting to that LAR, the number of uses aside from residential, and from that we compiled a list of 50 LARs outside of urban growth boundaries to do a site investigation. And I want to thank our inspections team over in engineering and construction services. They did a phenomenal job pulling this information together. Once they went out on site for those 50, it was determined that 10 of those actually were gravel, not paved. So we ended up creating cost estimates for 40 LARs. And so in order to bring these 40 LARs up to a good pavement condition, it would cost roughly $2,579,972. And I want to put an asterisk. This does not include bringing the roads up to county road standards. It only includes bringing the roads up to a good condition. For those inside of the urban growth boundary, we looked at paved again, but we had a different set of criteria, again, because of what I mentioned earlier about LARs inside of urban growth boundaries. Once fully, and this area surrounding is fully annexed, then automatically becoming a city street. So we looked at those that are paved, those that service through streets, and those that are more than just residential use. And from that sorting process, we came up with 13 LARs to do an on-site investigation. And again, 3 of those were determined to be gravel once on-site. You can only see so much from Google Earth. And so here is a summary of what it would take to bring those streets up to a good pavement condition. Again, this would not include bringing the road up to meeting Lane County road standards, i.e. widening the road to meet the required width. So that's $977,276. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we also have local access roads that have bridges on them. So I just wanted to call this out as a separate list. It goes without saying that regular maintenance is essential to keeping these bridges in good repair, so it's worth calling them out. I apologize for the cheesy slide, but I just wanted to highlight, unfortunately, there is no silver bullet to fixing the LAR problem. However, there are some small changes that we've identified that can be implemented to improve the overall conditions of these LARs in Lane County and reduce the number of safety hazards on these roads. These solutions can really be broken into 3 categories. maintenance, education, and oversight. And I'm going to hand it back off to Jim Cheney to cover the majority of them.
Chair Buck, Commissioners. So we looked at a couple of things. There's nothing, it's said that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And there are a couple of preventative measures that are low cost, but would provide some opportunity for over time for the roads to be better maintained. The first was a maintenance agreement. Many counties in the state require that if a local access road is to be dedicated, for instance, for a small subdivision, that there be a maintenance agreement. Right now, a local access road could serve 6 properties equally, but if only 2 owners want to fix it, then either they have to pay it or they have to convince the other people to do it. Requiring a maintenance agreement would require that the served properties have an agreement when it's originally dedicated that all the property owners will share in the costs for maintaining it, much like you would see ordinarily in an easement. If we were to create a rule like this, then at least when for new agreements for new local access roads, if we created a code requirement that would have this, then at least the owners would be on notice and would be prepared for doing the regular maintenance. Next slide, please. The other possible solution that we recommended was to pass an ordinance requiring a notice to buyers. That is, for properties that are served only by local access roads, to require that not on the deed, but on the property, it would be recorded that their property was served by a local access road, and that the county does not maintain local access roads, and that falls upon the property owner. We found that a lot of property owners are ignorant of when they bought the property, that the road was not a county road or was something that they would have to maintain. They might look at 1 or 2 properties, and one property much cheaper but served by a local access road with a maintenance obligation, and another served by a county road without a maintenance obligation. This would provide an opportunity to give buyers of the property notice of what the obligations were that came along with it. Neither one of these 2 solutions would provide an immediate benefit, but over the long term, they provide a benefit to the citizens who wind up purchasing and owning and using the local access roads. Sasha?
Yes, and then the last bucket falls under oversight. Currently, there's no mechanism for county staff to provide oversight on local access roads. A facility permit is required anytime work is performed on or adjacent to roads in the county road system, but that's not the case for LARs. The mechanism of a facility permit really provides county staff with the means to ensure that the work meets requirements laid out in Lane Code Chapter 15, and that the work is performed safely and is completed properly. And it might sound simple to just start requiring facility permits for work performed on or adjacent to LARs, but it does need to be done thoughtfully, and there are multiple financial implications to consider. One such includes cost recovery for staff time on reviewing the facility permits and processing the request. While many facility permits have fees associated with them, utility permits, which also fall under the umbrella of facility permits, do not, and it's actually prohibited based on ORS 759.010. So that's just an example of the nuances that we would need to take into consideration if we were to require facility permits on local access roads. Another simple consideration is that residents may just feel that it's wrong that they have to pay a fee and apply for a facility permit for work on an LAR when those roads aren't maintained by the county. So those are some details we're looking into under facility permits, but it's something we are continuing to consider. One of the other requests from the board was to engage the Transportation Advisory Committee in the conversation about local access roads. And I just wanted to provide you with a brief update on that point. We have been bringing this item to the Transportation Advisory Committee regularly. However, because of COVID-19 concerns, we were scheduled to meet with them on March 18th last month, and that meeting was canceled. So they've not been able to get a briefing of the most current recommendations and the completed inventory. I do want to hand off back to Dan Hurley briefly. There's one other safety-related concern that is that kind of falls under local access road issues, and it's about unconstructed public right-of-way.
Thanks, Sasha. The board, I just wanted to bring this to your attention. It's not a typical situation, but there may be others in the county, but this has been brought to your attention by a particular resident. I think you've all received emails on it, but it presents an example of how, because LARs aren't regulated, it creates some problems. This is an area in southwest Eugene where land was subdivided and roads were developed. And in the plans, there was supposed to be a connecting road that links where it says Laughlin Road there to Sarvisbury Lane. And that was never constructed, and I think decades have gone by. And the problem is that along these roads, the properties have further subdivided. So now there are probably 100 residents in this area. And with the issues of wildfire, it creates two long dead-end roads. Particularly, I'm forgetting what the road is on the right there. We don't have it on the map. I think it's this Peaceful Valley is the issue, where dozens of residents could be trapped there without an access out. And we don't currently have a mechanism to force the landowner to construct that road because it would be a local access road. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. This is just another one of those issues that local access roads present. And if we wanted to return at a later date to consider some action, we could do that. But I just wanted to flash that real quick. Thank you, Sasha.
Absolutely. So the last slide is about the recommendations that Jim Chaney was able to cover. So really what we recommend right now is consider implementing the following changes. Require a maintenance agreement when new LARs are formed by amending Lane Code Chapter 15, and then pass an ordinance so that the county could, anytime there is property transaction, record a document against the properties that front LARs that states that the property in question takes access off of an LAR, describes what an LAR is, and informs the property owner of their maintenance obligation. And we do want to take time to perform additional analysis on the need of requiring facility permits for work performed on or adjacent to an LAR, but we do believe this is the right avenue to investigate further. Given the uncertainty of the future road fund because of the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and Public Works continued work towards implementing the asset management system and getting a more complete picture of the needs of the county road system, staff at this time recommends holding off on making decisions about larger LAR infrastructure investments by the county. More dramatic changes may be called for in the future, but at this time, starting with implementing the recommendations laid out and monitoring the number of safety hazards reported and identified seems like the appropriate next steps. Staff will continue to explore these recommendations based on input from the board. So we look forward to a discussion and any questions that you might have. And I'll hand it back off to Chair Buck.
Yes, thank you very much. Are there any comments, questions regarding this? I'll start off with one and then maybe we'll get a discussion rolling. In our past conversations, we had discussed perhaps not allowing future LARs. Is there a reason that that wasn't part of this particular recommendation?
I can take that. I believe based on just the simplest path forward, based on the research that Mr. Chaney performed, that by requiring a maintenance agreement, that creates, that essentially ties folks' hands and makes makes it clear that they do need to perform maintenance on the roads. And so it's a simpler step forward, but we could further investigate, future LARs if you wish to.
I bring that up because I think in the long run, we may continue to have the same issues, even if there is a maintenance agreement put in place. Eventually, there'll be a time where they're older and people can't afford it, even if there's a maintenance agreement. That's my biggest concern. Any other comments or questions from anybody?
Chair, if I could also tag on to the answer that Sasha gave. This is Dan. There may also be considerations where you may want to have LARs rather than have a publicly maintained road. For example, if it was a fairly long stretch of road, maybe it's a mile long and it's only servicing one house, then should the public really bear the cost of maintaining that? So we might want, if we, instead of disallowing all local access roads, there might be a threshold where once it served a certain number of residences that it would be considered for public funding.
Also, this is Jim Cheney, Chair Buck. If one other possible solution that we've identified but haven't fully researched is the idea that when someone does create more development, say on the end of a local access road, and then the development, of course, is going to, and if the development itself is going to increase traffic, that then burdens the existing property owners, and the construction breaks down the road also, is to come up with a mechanism by which in the approval process there be a requirement to do upgrading of the road as a condition for on an existing LAR, as a condition for further development along the road. But we haven't come to the end of all the ins and outs of the implications of that.
Thank you. Mr. Hurley's comment, if there's a large mile drive for one house, you would think that would be a private driveway. Commissioner Bosevich, you had your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I will echo both Jim and Dan in that I don't think we need to eliminate LARs for the future, because there will be future development out in the county where it's going to be an extension of an existing local access road, and we're not going to want to put a county maintained road at the end of an existing local access road. If somebody partitions or subdivides property that's accessed from a local access road, that extension should be another local access road, not a county road. But I do think maybe there is, a future look at, is there a limitation? How many trips per day, average daily trips do we allow on a local access road? And that may be a place where we can kind of draw that line, and that's a development standard question for the future. I do want to say that I support the recommendations around the maintenance agreement for new LARs, and I also support the idea of trying to make sure we have some way of notifying property owners of their obligation through recorded documents. Hopefully that's not going to put we're not asking realtors to make that notification, because I know the realtors have a real issue when we start trying to make, there's enough requirements for notifications about houses and properties that when it starts becoming an off-site issue, they have a real issue with that. So if it's a mechanism that doesn't involve the realtor being liable for that notification, I support that second bullet point also.
Commissioner Burney.
Really great report. The report contained recommendations. Forgive my naivete, but what is the time frame for moving forward, approving or not those recommendations?
We can work on implementing. We are currently going through a Chapter 15 code update, and potentially we could evaluate if it makes sense with the board's interest in adding the maintenance agreement changes to that update. And then the ordinance, I guess it would be as easy as just preparing the appropriate language and bringing it to a future board agenda item.
Thank you. I'm interested in your doing that, but I don't know how the rest of the commissioners feel.
Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Sorensen?
Thanks very much. So what is the recommendation?
I'll move back. The recommendation from staff currently is to update Chapter 15 to include language about a required maintenance agreement when a new LAR is formed. And then the second recommendation is to pass an ordinance, essentially creating a notice to buyers when there's a property transaction where the property fronts an LAR.
Okay, and do you want to have a motion, or how do you want to have this implemented today?
That is up to the commissioner's preference.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Jim. We would present, since this requires a change to the lane code, we would present a memo and a proposed order and a time for hearing, because both of these would require a code change.
I'll move,
in addition, that might if the research on the costs of regulating or requiring facilities permits on LARs, that might be included in there if depending on the timing and the implications of those costs, if that caught up to the other two. The other two are ideas that are pretty much ready to go.
Okay, I'll move approval of the recommendations and ask that staff come back and present appropriate material within 3 weeks.
I'm hearing that we just need to direct staff in order to return with this rather than a formal motion. Do we have direction from the board, or is there a second to Mr. Sorensen? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. I'm just reading the staff's recommendation that we require a maintenance agreement when new LARs are defined, and that we pass an ordinance, etc. So, and Jim Cheney, I'm hearing that is what you would like us to just kind of give you the approval to move forward on without a motion. Is that correct, Jim?
I think that would be adequate, wouldn't it, Dan? For you to give your staff direction?
It would. Yeah, if we could just get 3 hand raises.
We got the general direction. So, is there any other comment or question for our presenters on this? Okay, well, I think you have our direction, which is go, and we got through without getting too far into the noon hour. There is a kind of related item, which is item D. It would be nice to be able to do these together. So let's move on to order 20-04-07-04 in the matter of approving road fund expenditures for code enforcement on local access roads. With us is Matt Tarnoff, Road Maintenance Manager.
Chair Buck, pardon me, my HSC meeting has been rescheduled for tomorrow, so I'm good to go clear until 1:30. So
very good. Although I don't think we'll have to go that far. We'll get a little break here before we start back up at 1:30. Mr. Tarnoff.
Can you all hear me? Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I'll be brief. I plan to be brief anyway, but since we're getting in the noon hour, I'll move along quickly. I'll just be referring to the agenda memo that I have submitted. Essentially, the board is being asked to approve road fund expenditure to support enforcement efforts of the Lane County Motor Carrier Enforcement Officer, also known as Waymaster, in regards to violations of related Oregon revised statutes and lane code occurring on local access roads. The intent of this order is to limit the scope of road fund expenditure on LARs to 1, the investigation and enforcement of reported abandoned vehicles, and 2, post and enforce regulatory code against illegal roadside activities. We do have quite a bit of history, but again, I'll be brief, so I'll move on to financial impacts here. Give me a second. Currently, the expenditure needed for code enforcement on LARs is not budgeted. However, identical rhythms in the form of abandoned vehicle investigation and the placement of signage notifying the public of enforceable codes already occur on Lane County public roads. While it is expected that initially expenditures associated with the aforementioned rhythms will swell over time, a nominal effect on the road fund is anticipated. Just to summarize health implications, we have lack of sanitary support for these types of incidences, i.e. Camping overnight or abandoned vehicles when things like fluids leak, causes illicit discharge and environmental issues. To summarize everything, the analysis of this situation, it is established through lane code that property owners residing on local access roads are responsible for the maintenance of these public facilities. It is also established through lane code that the local governing body has jurisdiction of public facilities, and in the case of LARs, bears no maintenance liability. In addition, must authorize expenditure of single project or continuing program concerning LARs. It is evident that code violations are occurring on LARs. Please see the attachments on this document for reference. It is unreasonable to expect property owners to monitor, manage, and move abandoned vehicles and overnight campers. The code violations highlighted in this memorandum, again, examples being abandoned vehicles, camping on the right-of-way, etc., are outside the realm of maintenance, and they are generally public rules not specific to definition of road type. Considering the nature of the code violations that have been occurring on certain LARs, specifically unsanitary conditions, road safety, and nuisance complaints, it is in the greater community's interest to prioritize enforcement of ordinances designed to keep us all healthy and safe. By allocating road fund expenditure to support code enforcement and regulatory sign installation on LARs, the county will address a growing health and safety issue. The options that are laid before the board are to, 1, approve road fund expenditures for code enforcement on all local access roads as a continuing program or a single project. The second option would be to approve the road fund expenditures for code enforcement on defined local access roads as, again, a continuing program or single project. Option 3, direct road maintenance staff toward a mutually agreeable goal. It is staff recommendation that Lane County Public Works, under the direction and consent of Dan Hurley, see attachment 4, and in accordance to ORS 368.031(2)A and B, as well as Lane Code 15.010 EV AA and B, recommends that the Board of County Commissioners approves the order to allocate road fund expenditures for the purpose of code enforcement and regulatory sign installation as a continuing program. This order will fulfill the requirements of the county's governing body as described in ORS 368.031(2)C and Lane Code 15.010 EVCC. As far as timing and implementation, the tools to mitigate this active issue already exist in the form of standing ordinances and trained staff supplied with appropriate support. Upon the approval of this order, staff will, without haste, move to address code violations. The immediate next step would involve the motor carrier enforcement officer prioritizing and administering the needed actions to address code violations on local access roads. Since these phenomena have gone unchecked for years, it is expected that the number of citations will surge at the beginning of this process and taper off over time. That is all I have to say on that.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Commissioner Bozovich.
I was just going to move approval of the order, if that's okay. So I was going to move approval of Order 20-04-0704.
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Bozovich, second by Commissioner Farr. Any discussion? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Only a question to the motion. I'm presuming that that it will not completely impede the other actions, the other work of the motor carrier enforcement officer. That will still be able to continue the weights and measures that take place.
That is correct, Commissioner Farr. That is typically these are lower priority for the motor carrier enforcement officer. And again, as I mentioned, this will be a swelling of effort at the beginning, but will ultimately taper off as it is a lower priority for him.
And Chair Buck, we sometimes hear that people are concerned that we don't conduct enough on-road weight checks. I guess I'd like to kind of keep an eye on that as we move forward and make sure that people aren't feeling that the roads are being traveled by unsafe vehicles.
Any other comments? Commissioner Boswich.
I'd just like to say I'm supporting this effort. As a rural commissioner, I consistently hear about things that happen in the right of way and not private property of LARs. And so there's not civil action that can be taken, and the county wasn't really responding, and it's gotten to be quite an issue everywhere from, in close in town and LARs that are inside UGB to way out in the country. And I know that this is going to be some extra work for the Waymaster, but I believe it's something that's necessary to try and keep some semblance of law and order, I guess, inside these weird things that are local access roads that we just finished spending a half hour discussing the maintenance of. So I think it's an important step.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, Commissioner Farr.
Just to add that some of the LARs are, of course, inside of UGBs. They're not entirely outside UGB.
Yes, they're everywhere in our county, as we just talked about, and I too hear about it in the rural communities. They tend to be a place where people stash stuff and don't clean it up, or other nefarious things. So I also support this. Any other comments before we go to a vote? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Well, with that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner.
Absolutely. With that, I think that we will go to recess. Before I do that formally, I just want to remind everybody that when we call back in at 1 o'clock or 1:30,
Yeah.
it's a new link to link into the webinar. So make sure you follow the instructions from Ms. Jones. And with that, we'll recess. Thank you.